to her son's face. "Eric," she muttered, more to herself than to her son. "What am I going to do with you?" She glanced down at the bed frame and her eyebrows raised. "I think you were born on this bed. Not this mattress, that got tossed out, but this bed frame, I remember it. I grabbed the sides while giving birth. You were a week early and the healer was at the Snoggletog party. Stupid me, I told her to go, not to stay there on my account. A few minutes later, you just slipped out before we could go get her. Rough Nut was there, I think she'd broken her ankle a few hours before, and she hobbled over to catch you. And that was that." She stared at the towel in her hand as she continued to try to cool her son down. Olaf was delighted. "He was the one who picked your name. He held you first." She faltered. She'd forgotten this part of the story in the years since Eric's birth, but she felt like she had to continue. She needed to tell her son what had happened. "I closed my eyes. I heard you crying, but I didn't want to see you or hold you." Lara felt a rare surge of emotion. She didn't know why she was telling him all this. He couldn't hear her. But she needed to admit it. She needed to tell him what had happened, why he had always been different for her. He deserved to know. "Those first few months after you were born, I couldn't stand to hold you. I was irritable, emotional, anxious. I couldn't eat and I couldn't sleep. I had to force myself to nurse you. I had no energy for day-to-day tasks and I used to snap at everyone. I remember one time Magnus knocked over a vase I liked and I ranted and shouted at her until she cried. Olaf intervened, told me I was overreacting, and I continued shouting at him. I couldn't stop myself, I was so angry. I was in a dark place, Eric." Lara shook her head, dipping the cloth in the cool water in the basin next to her. "It never felt like that with any of the others. I thought something was wrong with you. But your father, he didn't stop loving you. He was the first person to make you smile. He used to hold you for hours just to make sure you were getting enough human interaction." She sighed deeply. "You were a few months old before I finally started feeling like myself again. But I blamed you for that. For coming into my life so unexpectedly, even though I had been extremely careful, and for the horrible way I felt. I realize now that it wasn't your fault. I said I loved you because I had to. But maybe." Lara pushed down another surge of emotion and continued. "Maybe I didn't. Maybe I haven't." Lara looked over at her son's bandaged stump. Mara had managed to save half of the leg. Eric would still be able to use his knee, but his foot was completely gone. Like Hiccup, Gobber, and many older Vikings, he would have to walk on a metal leg for the rest of his life. Lara wasn't too concerned about that. Hiccup acted as if he hardly noticed he even had a prosthetic leg. But still, what an adjustment. "When this happened, I didn't even know how to react. I got the news and I was just so shocked, I couldn't think straight. But when Hiccup wouldn't let me in, when the anger had subsided, I realized something." Lara leaned in so that Eric could hear her more clearly, assuming he was capable of hearing her. "I do love you. Maybe not the way you want or need me to, but I don't want to waste any more time being angry at you or shouting at you for petty things. I should have acted like I loved you years ago, but I didn't." Lara couldn't push down the fresh wave of emotion. She felt tears streak down her face. "I lost Olaf and Aud. Please. I can't lose you too." She leaned down and kissed Eric's cheek. He didn't respond. "I can't change the past, but I do want to have a future with you. I want you to come home, Eric." Eric's eyelids twitched. For a split second, Lara thought he was about to open his eyes, but the moment passed and her son remained unconscious. She reached up and stroked his face. His cheek was rough with the manly scruff he had been dutifully shaving off. Her little boy had grown up and she had hardly noticed. When Gustav had been that age, she had been so tired she had let him disappear for days at a time, but she always asked questions about what he had been doing when he returned. She had even forcefully talked him out of pursuing his ridiculous crush on Astrid. Magnus and Aud had both been busy with activities outside the house, but she supported them with whatever it was they were doing. Nicholas, well, he was the one who would come home each day with a detailed account of his activities and readily asked for her advice. But Eric, she didn't know anything about him. How had she missed her own son's life for such a long time? The reason was simple. Olaf had taken over. Adriana had been there for when Olaf was unavailable. Lara had it quite easy in that regard. She didn't have to put forth any effort. So she hadn't. And when both Olaf and Adriana were gone, well, it really was no wonder her son had taken everything so hard. And Lara had told him to get over it anyway. To suppress his emotions after losing the two most important people in his life. What kind of mother did that? I'm sorry, she whispered as she continued to towel his forehead. I'm so sorry. And, for the first time in a long time, Lara knew in her heart that she meant every word. In the years to come, Hiccup remembered very little of what had happened in the first few days after Finn left Berk. He fell into a routine of doing his duties as chief and caring for Eric. This was all he seemed to do for the next 2 days. Aside from a terror that had come a full day after Finn had left, bearing only the words "I'm still alive," he had no idea where his son was and what he was doing. This distressed him greatly. Finn remained on his mind every second of every day. Even at night, he'd fall asleep and wake up in a cold sweat, images of his little boy lying dead in a ditch somewhere flashing before his eyes. He knew his boy was resourceful and intelligent enough on his own to avoid the horrible events of his previous voyage outside of Berk. These facts did nothing except to mask Hiccup's gut-wrenching fear that he would never see his son again. Hiccup's next clear memory was a day after his talk with Adriana. He was sitting beside Eric, keeping his body temperature down and reading a book while he did so when Inga walked into the curtained-off area. "Everything okay?" she asked in a business-like tone. Hiccup stifled a smile. It was quite humorous to see Inga act like a little adult. "It's pretty good, thanks. That's my job. But listen, my mom wants to talk to you for a bit." Inga told him. "Are you sure you don't mean your dad?" "Believe me, Mr. Hiccup, if I'd meant to say it was my dad, I'd have said it. My parents are two very different people," Inga said with a smirk. "But is it okay?" "Yeah. Of course." Hiccup nodded. "Why does she want to talk to me?" "She wouldn't tell me. She just said she had something on her mind and she wanted to talk to you about it." Inga breathed a laugh at Hiccup's raised eyebrow. "I don't think you're in trouble or anything. That's not what I was afraid of." Hiccup allowed himself to smile as Inga walked through the curtain. The more he saw of the Jorgensen girl, the more he liked her. She was as fierce as her father and as intelligent as her mother. She was like Helga in this way, except that Helga was easily swayed by dangerous influences. Inga had a good head on her shoulders. Hiccup almost felt sorry for any boy who would try to win her heart in the future. Between Snotlout's protective nature concerning his daughter and Inga's strong will, that poor boy would have a difficult road ahead. Then again, so would any boy who dared to get serious with his Addie. He was interrupted from his thoughts when Heather joined him. She gave him a friendly smile as she sat down next to him. "How's he doing?" she asked, looking over at Eric. "No change. But Mara says that stable is good right now. His body's healing at its own pace," Hiccup said, quickly changing towels. "Keeping him cool is the hard part. If he gets a fever or an infection..." He couldn't finish the sentence. "Good." Heather nodded. "I don't really know him all that well, but he seems like a good kid." "He is." Hiccup agreed. "Needs some guidance for sure, but he's an upstanding young man. He reminds me of you when we met," Heather said, staring at the boy's face. "Small, a bit unsure of himself, but so very sweet. He'd give you the shirt off his back. And fall right into my trap." Hiccup chuckled. "I don't doubt it. You were a very good actress." "Finn wouldn't have." Hiccup looked at her. "Wouldn't have, what?" "Been fooled by my nice girl act," Heather explained in a soft voice. "He'd have seen through me just like his mother did." "Well, you don't know that for sure," Hiccup mumbled. "I do know that for sure." Heather leaned forward so that she was in his peripheral vision. "He's a lot like Astrid. He'd have picked up on the little details everyone else would have overlooked." "You forget that you were a pretty teenage girl among hormonal teenage boys," Hiccup reminded her. "Another hen in the rooster house," as Ruffnut put it. Heather said, making Hiccup laugh again. That's probably why Astrid didn't trust me right away. But Finn's even smarter, particularly in ways you're not. You think his behavior recently was smart? Hiccup shook his head. Yes, I do. Heather agreed emphatically. Hiccup stopped toweling Eric's forehead for a moment to stare at her. Heather put up a hand. Let me finish. Finn was smart, he was just unwise. His brain was fully capable of incredibly clever strategies that kept you guessing for months. You can't argue that he wasn't smart. Heather continued. His reasoning was his problem. But his leadership skills in the beginning must have been top-notch or he wouldn't have roped in so many followers. Hiccup blinked. He honestly hadn't thought of it that way. Well, smart doesn't mean right. Plenty of horrible people are smart. It takes a lot of brains to be evil and get away with it for a long time. Thoughts of Trista and Dager entered his mind and he gritted his teeth. You think he's evil? Heather asked patiently. Hiccup looked up at her. No. Of course not. I'm just saying. You're just explaining away a form of intelligence you don't possess in large quantities. Heather interrupted. I think you've been doing that a lot lately. What are you talking about? Hiccup turned to her fully, leaving the damp towel on Eric's forehead. I've supported him. I've told him he's got potential that he's not using and I've encouraged him every way I know how. I don't explain away what makes him special. No, Hiccup. Heather said firmly. You don't see what makes him special because it makes you uncomfortable. Can't be as uncomfortable as the discussion we're having now. Hiccup mumbled. Heather sighed. Finn isn't you, Hiccup. Neither are Eric or Anna. I know that. Hiccup grumbled. I never pretended that he was. My point, Heather said slowly, is that while Eric and Anna are a lot like you, Finn is a lot more like Stoic. And that makes you uncomfortable. That doesn't make any sense. I think it does. Heather nodded. Hiccup, you make it your platform as chief to exemplify that might doesn't make right. And you do it well. Being small and compassionate never stopped you from achieving greatness. You've instilled that in your daughter and she's better off for it. You're instilling it in Eric as well. But Finn feels differently. He should be taught that though. Of course he should. But what you're not teaching him is that a good heart can only take you so far. Sometimes it really does take the hard work and strong muscles to get things done. Sometimes logic is more important than values. You don't always have time to consider every angle and that's okay. Heather told him patiently. Finn excels at fast thinking and putting emotions aside to make decisions. He likes being strong and using his muscles to help people. I know that. Hiccup shook his head. But a good heart is more important than any of that. Without a good moral foundation, he's just going to use that brawn to hurt people. You're right. Heather agreed. But that brawn is what Finn is. It's not as easy for him to stop and think of others first. And it's even harder when you overlook what he does naturally and make him focus on what isn't easy for him. It's good for him. Hiccup huffed. He doesn't need coaching on how to throw axes or make swords or fly into battle. He already knows all that. But he doesn't understand strong leadership. This whole time we've been talking, I haven't said anything about compassion being a bad thing or something he shouldn't be learning. Heather put up her hands. But you've spent this whole time acting as if what I'm saying is, I don't know, offensive. It's not offensive. Hiccup turned back to Eric. It's just that I don't think it's any of your business how I raise my children. It probably isn't. Heather shrugged. But I'm going to say it anyway. The way your father treated you while you were growing up wasn't right. He overlooked your positive traits and focused solely on your shortcomings. That clearly damaged you a lot. I loved my dad. Hiccup muttered. And I forgave him a long time ago. I've healed. You have, in a way. Heather said compassionately. You've forgiven him. You've moved past it. But those emotional scars are just that, scars. They might not hurt you anymore, but you've made it your mission not to pass them on to your kids because you know how much they can hurt. So why didn't it work? Hiccup asked in a trembling voice. Why did Addy come back and Finn push me farther away? Because you made the same mistake as your dad. Heather told him. Hiccup turned toward her. You focused on his shortcomings but you didn't acknowledge his strengths. It's simple really, you just didn't see his gifts as worthy of support. That's not true. I love him. I want what's best for him. What's best for him isn't what would have been best for you. Heather put a hand on his arm. Hiccup, I know you didn't mean to, but you downplayed what made him special. You made him feel inadequate, like he couldn't live up to the kid who ended the war all those years ago. He's not a naturally emotional person, so of course he hid it from you. Of course he acted like everything was fine. But I think every time you implied that physical strength didn't mean anything, you hurt him a little. It was like you were saying he wasn't ever going to measure up. Eventually, he stopped trying. Hiccup stared at her, his mouth agape. His heart constricted painfully, making it slightly difficult to breathe. He hated to say it, but Heather was right. No wonder Finn had gone so completely against everything he had ever been taught. That was exactly what Hiccup had done. And while Hiccup had gone out of his way to reach out to Eric, a boy very much like himself, he had made Finn feel even more unloved and ignored. In short, Hiccup had made the same mistake as Stoic. Exactly the same mistake. He put his head in his hands. Oh gods. Hiccup, it's a completely understandable mistake, especially with your history. Heather said encouragingly. I don't think anyone blames you. Finn does. Hiccup said shakily. This makes all the difference. And you can apologize to him when he gets home. Heather stated. I just wanted to point that out. Why didn't Astrid ever tell me? Hiccup wiped his face with the back of his hand. He might not have cried at this normally, but with the lack of sleep and worry for Finn and Eric, he found himself close to tears at all times. I think she took it upon herself to make Finn feel comfortable with who he was. Heather explained. Maybe she didn't make the connection that I did. Why do I even have kids if all I ever do is hurt them at every turn? Hiccup sniffed and wiped the last tears off his face. I just want them to be happy and feel accepted. It's not too late for that. Heather smiled. When Dustin and Vidar were about 6, Snotlout took Dustin on a hunting trip. They hit a doe and Dustin was very upset. He argued with Snotlout the whole way back about how horrible he was, and Snotlout argued that hunting kept him fed, so he had no right to complain. Dustin refused to eat meat for days and Snotlout was furious at him for disregarding how much work went into feeding the family and how he had a weak disposition. It was intense. But finally I sat them both down and I explained that they both had a point. Dustin was upset that Snotlout had killed an innocent animal, but I reminded him that Snotlout had done it so quickly, the doe didn't feel any pain. I also told him that the doe didn't go to waste because we used the skin and the meat to keep us warm and healthy. I told Snotlout that Dustin's heart for animals was a good thing and that he should work with dragons if he liked them so much. I also told him that Dustin didn't have to be a big hunter like him and that was okay. That worked. Not at first. Snotlout was upset that his son wasn't just like him. Dustin was upset with the perception that his father was a killer. Neither of them had the full story, and when they thought about it, they came to an agreement. Now Snotlout takes the Vidar and Inga hunting and Dustin flying. Activities everyone enjoys. Heather finished. Dustin wasn't wrong, he was just different. So is Finn. I've never liked hunting much. Hiccup mumbled. Or bodybuilding stuff. I get my muscles from flying. What can I even do with him? Encourage him. Heather replied. And maybe you'd like hunting more if instead of being the shooter, you watched your son's instincts at work. I'm sure he's great at it. If he comes home. He'll come home. Heather assured him. Just give him some time. It's the best medicine. A tiny groan interrupted their thoughts. Eric shifted positions in the bed, his eyelids twitching. Eric. Hiccup whispered. The boy groaned again. He winced when he moved his damaged leg before drifting off once more. Soon his rhythmic breathing was the only movements he made. Hiccup shakily sighed. It's okay, Eric, he said to the teenager. Take your time. Heather's right. It is the best medicine after all. He looked back at his friend. Thanks. Anytime. Heather replied, patting his shoulder as she stood up. I'm here to talk if you or Astrid need it. Or be an impartial judge. When did you get so wise? I'm a keen observer. I had to be to pull one over on you all when we were kids. And you, Hiccup, aren't too hard to read. Heather grinned at Hiccup's frown. Sometimes wearing your heart on your sleeve isn't such a bad thing. But I think you could stand to learn from your wife or your son a little bit. Maybe I could. Hiccup nodded. Thanks for being the voice of reason. Wouldn't be the first time. Heather said before walking out from behind the curtain. The first night at Kara's had been rather awkward. He hadn't considered the fact that Kara had an incredibly inquisitive daughter. Sigrid had peppered him with questions on several until Finn was eager to leave the house. Her brother Corey was quieter, but he too listened to Finn's answers with rapt attention. The teenager found himself eating breakfast at a fast pace so he could ask the blacksmith to let him help out. When he got to the forge, Finn realized just how much he had missed his work. True, he had been away from Gobber for only a few days, but all the drama made it difficult to concentrate. Getting back into the forge was a relief. The blacksmith on Braun was a strong woman named Dagny. Her name reminded Finn of a slightly less savory one, but he pushed it out of his head. Dagny was a hard worker, as was Gobber, but she wasn't nearly as funny. Finn found himself smiling less and working more. Not that he minded. He needed to get back to the grind. Working helped him focus. Dagny liked his productivity, so she mostly left him alone. By the time the workday ended, Finn was sore and ready to stop, but he didn't want to go back to Kara's. Not with the ever-curious Sigrid and Corey hovering around him until they went to bed. But it wasn't as if he had anywhere else to go, certainly not on a foreign island where he knew no one. The moment he stepped out of the forge, he plowed right into a passerby. "Gods, I'm sorry," he said, helping her pick up what she was carrying. "Wasn't looking where I was." His mouth dropped open. "Rain." "Finn." The two teenagers stared at each other in surprise. Finally, Rain spoke up. "I didn't know you were working here," she said, weakly gesturing to the forge. "I sure am. I have to do something for money and Dagny's a bit short on help." "And you lasted all day? As a newcomer?" Rain smiled. "You must be really good." "She's pretty picky. She didn't say anything to me. I guess I passed the test." "I guess you did. Anyway," Finn moved his satchel farther up his arm. Are you busy?" "Am I? Oh. No, I was just going to the mead hall for some food." Rain said. "I like food." Finn piped up. He internally kicked himself. What a ridiculous thing to say. I mean, I was thinking of going there too." "You want to come with me?" Rain asked, extending her arm playfully. "Come on, I won't bite." "Who says I won't?" Finn quipped, taking her arm in his. "Lead the way, dear." Rain laughed and the two of them began to walk to the hall. "So are you meeting your boyfriend here?" Finn ventured. "Ha. No boyfriend as of right now." Rain elbowed him in the gut, making him smile. "And my sister's visiting another island for the next week with a lot of my friends. And the remaining one is working late tonight. So it'll just be us. Two lonely souls sharing a meal and commiserating. Sounds like a lot of laughs." Finn grinned cheekily at her. "So you have a brother?" "Yep, a younger sister and a big brother. Just like you." "I don't have a brother." "You have Eric." Finn made a face. "Eric is not my brother. He's been living at the house and your parents love him like a son." "That's what you said." Rain began climbing the steps to the mead hall, Finn following just behind her. "I think that upgrades him to family." "I don't." "Was Benin family?" Rain asked. Finn stopped in the middle of the staircase. "Why does that matter?" "Because if you love someone the way you love your family, they're family to you." Rain pulled him up the stairs. "I mean, technically I don't have a sister, but my parents took her in about 6 years ago because of a similar situation." "And you love her?" "Of course. She might not be blood, but my parents love her and my brother loves her." Rain held the door open for Finn, who felt awkward walking through. She needed us and, though we didn't know it at the time, we needed her. And I think your family needs Eric too. Finn paused as he walked into the large hall, unsure of where to sit. What's her name? Erica. What? Rain burst out laughing. I'm kidding. It's Sophie. Unusual name. Finn said as he grabbed a plate. I think my sister had this book about a Sophie when she was younger. The one about the giant? Rain asked. Yeah, Sophie loves that one. Anyway, I get those feelings, Finn. When my parents first brought Sophie home, I thought I wasn't being a good enough daughter. But it wasn't about me at all. I'm glad your situation worked out. Finn grumbled. At least you didn't kill her. I really doubt you killed Eric. Rain reminded him, scooping some mashed potatoes onto her plate. I think he'll be okay. Right. Finn said as he finished adding food to his plate. Where do you want to sit? Pick a place, said Rain. Finn chose a table by the edge of the hall. At home, he liked to sit in the middle while Adriana and Eric tended to prefer the edges. But this time, he didn't want to be the center of attention. He wasn't a future chief here and he had about as many friends as he deserved, 0. Rain sat down across from him and eyed his plate of food. I don't think you're eating enough. Eating makes me sick. Finn said, trying to eat the meager portions of food on his plate. You know, it's awkward when the girl eats more. Rain took a bite of chicken and scooped up some of her potatoes. Come on, Finn. We meatheads make the best mashed potatoes in the archipelago. I seriously doubt that. No really, it's a Brownian specialty. We use the best of the best, taught to us by the ancient tribe of Hysterics. They invented the potato, you know. Finn rolled his eyes. That's not how it happened. They just brought it over from the west to cure Vorpentitis, everyone knows that. You know, Finn, sometimes you're just a touch too literal. Rain tapped his nose with the tip of her finger. Play pretend once in a while. That's Anna's thing. No point in pretending things that aren't real. You're wrong about that. Rain said firmly. There's no such thing as unreal, when you think about it. Even stories can bring about real meanings and real emotional impact. It takes skill to think up a good story, perseverance to write it, and openness for the readers to get something out of it. Finn raised an eyebrow. Are you saying I should read more? I'm saying you shouldn't blow off the idea people. Rain said. Anna and your dad are big idea people. They might be all talk and no application sometimes, but that brainstorming leads to ideas that people like you, people who like to do things instead of think about things, might not have considered. Why are you telling me all this? I'm trying to give you some perspective. Rain explained. So you can understand each other when you go back. If I go back? Finn mumbled. And that's not exactly what I was asking. Why do you care so much? Because you're sad and alone. Rain reached forward and brushed his bangs from in front of his eyes. And I don't like seeing sad people. Finn felt his inner fire ignite for the first time since he had made out with Donna. That had been stupid. Donna was most certainly a girl with loose morals. Finn knew for a fact that she considered each man she slept with to be a conquest rather than a deep relationship. He even suspected she'd been with Cale, though Morgan still didn't know about that. But Rain wasn't Donna. Rain was a nice girl who cared about him, even though she knew what he had done. She was beautiful and she was intoxicating. As they talked some more, Finn decided that he would do what he could to spend as much time with this girl as possible. Maybe he had a second chance after all. Crickets chirped, stars twinkled, waves crashed along the crags below. The night was calm and silent except for nature's nighttime beauty. But Hiccup couldn't enjoy it. He sat along the edge of the cliffside, elbows resting on his knees as he leaned on Toothless, who snoozed on the ground behind him. The chief watched the horizon wearily, but he didn't feel like moving. Even though he'd slept in, the day had been long and hard, leaving him drained and lacking energy early in the afternoon. But a chief's job is never finished. Puffy clouds swept across the oceanic distance like cotton balls. Hiccup could remember the days lying in the grass with his family, listening as his young children babbled about the various shapes they could find in the clouds. Even then, they'd bicker about who saw what and why what they saw was better than the other. It had been cute and precious back then. Now, Hiccup yearned for peace and friendship in his family. He wanted everyone to be united. He wanted them to be a team. But nothing he could say or do made a difference anymore. He didn't know what to do, with Finn incognito, Eric out of commission and Adriana sitting at his bedside for as long as she was allowed. Things needed to change, children sometimes had to figure things out on their own. But he still felt responsible for all his children's miseries. Hiccup and Toothless were alerted to the sound of wildly flapping wings behind them. Hiccup felt his dragon twist his neck to see their visitors. The chief vaguely recognized the sounds of the dragon landing just behind Toothless, but he didn't move. The loud clomp of someone sliding to the ground, followed by heavy footfalls, and finally a large figure sat down beside him before he realized who it was. Fishlegs sat there silently, hands folded across his stomach as he watched the horizon. Hiccup relaxed, maybe Fishlegs just wanted to sit here for moral support. That would be nice. His hopes were dashed to pieces when, after a few quiet minutes, Fishlegs turned toward him. Hiccup, his old friend, began softly. You need to go home. Hiccup felt dull and blank as he tried to come up with a response. Finally, he gave a mild shrug. Can't go home. Yes, you can. You're going to kill yourself if you don't get enough rest. Hiccup didn't reply. Fishlegs had to understand how hard it was to go home and try to sleep, not knowing where his son was, not knowing if he was alright. Not knowing what nightmares lay ahead, both psychological and born in reality. He's coming back, Hiccup. Fishlegs said. We don't know that. Yes, I do. He's going to be fine. Oh, you know then? Hiccup asked sardonically. Tell me when then, before I lose my mind. And while you're at it, why don't you tell me when Eric is going to wake up? Fishlegs kept his expression impassive. I know this week no. This summer has been hard on you and Astrid. You've both been working your tails off, and then the gang, and now all of this. I understand that it's taxing on you, emotionally and physically. But if you don't get rest, you're going to be even worse off tomorrow. Besides. Fishlegs paused. Don't you think Astrid might want you home? She needs comforting too. Hiccup winced. Ouch. He swallowed, unwilling to release the excuses threatening to pass his lips. For that reason alone, he should be jumping up and going home. He couldn't keep doing this to her, if anything. You're right. Yup. So? I can't sleep, Fish. Fishlegs watched him warily. Can't or won't? Do you need sleep aids from Mara? Hiccup chewed his lip. Nightmares. Oh. Fishlegs nodded understandingly. What about? You don't have to share. Finn Hiccup rubbed his face, swallowing hard. I'm just creating all these scenarios in my head of what could happen and I'm not there to help him. Hiccup. And then there's Eric's accident with all the blood, which is just a trigger for all the other nightmares I've ever had. Hiccup resisted the urge to shudder. He could almost feel the scars on his neck burn in pain from the jagged edge of a blade. You still have those. They come and go. Hiccup admitted. It might be linked to stress. And lack of sleep. And sudden life-threatening situations. Fishlegs shrugged. It could be lots of things. The men sat in silence for a few minutes while Toothless and Meatlug snoozed behind them. After nearly 10 minutes, Hiccup prepared himself to take the trek home to his wife when Fishlegs finally spoke again. I'll say a few things. First, get sleep aid if you have to. You don't want to get sick or have an accident of your own because you collapsed from exhaustion. Okay. Fishlegs asked in a firm tone. Hiccup nodded weakly. Second, I want you to listen to me. Finn is a great kid. He's smart, strong, and well trained. He's got enough experience from the worst the world has to offer, so he'll have his wits about him the entire time he's gone, I'm sure of it. Hiccup shook his head. I'll go insane if he doesn't come home soon. Before the ice sets in, and that's in less than 2 months. He won't be gone that What if he doesn't show up for a few years? How are we supposed to move on from that? How do you cope with a child leaving, not knowing when or if he's coming back? What do you want me to do, Fish? Hiccup demanded. I want you to breathe. Fishlegs replied calmly. Hiccup huffed, shoving a hand through his hair. I can't imagine what that's like. I'm not going to say it's easy or that you're overreacting because you're not. You're acting like any parent would. But if Finn can't learn here, out there is the best place for him. It's a hard world out there and he'll learn one way or another just how wrong he was and he'll come running back. He will, Hiccup. I can feel it. Hiccup shook his head morosely. I told him to leave. You didn't tell him to leave, Burke. You love him and he'll see that soon if he hasn't already. I'm a lousy father and everyone knows it. Fishlegs stiffened. Stop that. If I were to hear that come from anyone's mouth, I'd set them straight in a heartbeat. Stop selling yourself short because your son has made many mistakes, and most of them are not your fault. You raised a young man with great potential and he's chosen to squander it. That's not your fault. You're the most devoted father I know. Hiccup couldn't help the anger that clutched his heart. Then why is all of this happening? If I'm such a great parent, why do both of my kids struggle so much? Have your kids ever told you to your face that they hate you? Yes, Fishlegs gave a wry smile. They're just less dramatic and explosive about it. Usually. Your children like to make scenes out of things, they want your attention. But in so doing, they want everyone in the world to know that you messed up in the process. It's kind of a reverse effect. Kind of interesting psychology when you think about it. Hiccup pinned him with a glare. Sorry. Fishlegs scratched his scruffy cheek nervously. Anyway, your kids feel a lot of pressure because of their status. They've both gone through a lot emotionally and physically. They've got a lot of pent-up bitterness. That doesn't mean they should take it out on you and Astrid. But they do, Hiccup mumbled as he rubbed his face. And no matter what happens, I can't shift the blame. I could have done better. You'll give yourself an aneurysm thinking like that. So be it. Fishlegs cracked a smile and pushed his shoulder. Come on now, none of that. Hiccup stared at the horizon sullenly. Fishlegs sighed. Hiccup, as your friend but also your councilman, he waited until Hiccup finally looked him in the eye. Please trust me on this. He's coming back. Hiccup forced back the burn in his eyes, turning his gaze back to the skies. He felt his Adam's apple bob in his throat with the force of the swallow he choked down. Fishlegs breathed a short sigh and got to his feet. Come on, Hiccup felt his friend grab his left arm and haul him to his feet. You look terrible. Go home, Chief. Be with your wife. Hiccup nodded. Okay. But. Fish, why? Fishlegs turned to him questioningly. Finn hurt your daughter. Hiccup said. Why would you even want him back? Fishlegs looked hurt. Hiccup, I watched that boy grow up too. I'm angry with him and fully plan to talk to him when the time is right, but I don't hate him. I want to help him in any way I can because he needs it. He's our future chief as much as you were when we were kids. You're a living testament to the fact that running doesn't solve problems, it doesn't stop time. One day, he's going to be chief. Our job is to make sure that when the time comes, he's ready. And so help me Thor, when that day comes, he's going to be a good man just like his father. Hiccup's face tightened emotionally. We don't deserve that, Fish. Fishlegs smiled. You're my friend. I love you like a brother, and Astrid like a sister. It's what friends do. Hiccup breathed a laugh, trying to wave off the tears welling up. Ah, come here, big guy. The men embraced, slapping each other on the backs. Hiccup felt his heart swell, thankful for such a good friend. Even better, he knew all his other friends from his childhood would be just as willing to tell him when he was being ridiculous. They'd always be there to pick him up out of the dirt, give him advice, help him in his greatest time of need. And he'd do the same for any of them. Toothless warbled at them. Hiccup smiled and pushed his nose away when he released his friend. All right, bud, let's go home. Get lots of rest, Hiccup. I mean it. Fishlegs pointed at the chief as he climbed into Meatlug's saddle. Yes sir, Hiccup saluted with a short laugh before Toothless took off. Thanks, Fish. Anytime. Hiccup felt a little lighter on the flight home. He still felt loads of grief in his chest at his son's departure. He hated not knowing anything and worry still gnawed at his heart. But with his friends just a flight away, he knew he wouldn't carry this burden alone. The house was dark and silent when they arrived. Hiccup quickly took the rugging off his dragon's back and tail, then went upstairs as quietly as he could. He could vaguely make out Astrid's form in the dark as he changed, but soon he heard her shift under the sheets. You're home late. Sorry, he whispered as he climbed into bed beside her. Got talking to Fishlegs. Oh. Okay. Hiccup buried his face into her neck, effectively pushing her onto her back in the process. Astrid gave a startled OOF, then chuckled. Getting cozy, she asked, dragging her fingernails down his scalp. PHHHHHHHH. Hiccup mumbled, sparks shooting down his spine. Gods, she hadn't done that in a long time. He'd almost forgotten how much he loved that. Astrid giggled, but he could hear the weariness in her voice. Too bad it's so late. Hiccup smiled against her skin and planted a kiss at her pulse. Well, I don't know, I'm still awake. You're half asleep. So are you. We could change that. Ha. Hiccup smirked. Astrid dragged her fingers through his hair again, but he could feel her slowly falling back to sleep. Raising his head, he gently kissed her. Go back to sleep, babe. But. Astrid. There are 2 less ears in the house, we should be proactive. Astrid. Hiccup guffawed. That's horrible. I can't believe you just made light of our son's disappearance so we can. Oh, shut up and hold me, Haddock. Wait, so now you just want to cuddle. You ruined the mood. I did not. Woman. Hiccup, shut up, our daughter is down the hall. How do you women anyway, it's so confusing. Fine, fine. Astrid snickered, shoving him onto his back. She dragged a leg over his waist and snuggled into his chest. Good night, babe. Hiccup swallowed but kissed her forehead tenderly. You're not making this easy. But good night. Once they settled down, it didn't take long for them to fall asleep. Tomorrow was another day. But they could only hope that it would bring a brighter horizon. Chapter 21, Consumed. Chapter text. Around 2 in the afternoon, Hiccup found himself in the square helping the fishermen load dozens and dozens of barrels on 2 carts. With winter coming in the next 10 to 12 weeks, they only had so much time to stock up on food and other things. The morning air had been a tad chilly, making him think of his son. The vague little note made his heart rise into his throat, but at least he was alive. He hoped he'd be able to find decent shelter wherever he was. Thankfully the afternoons were decently warm though, his son wouldn't freeze to death out there. Yet. All right, Hiccup groaned, shoving the last barrel into a car. He wiped a bead of sweat off his forehead and pointed down the street. Let's get these to the hall. Set them in the freeze room in an organized manner. Snot loud and I will get the counts later. Yes sir. Hiccup watched the men and few teenagers begin to push the carts down the street. He sighed heavily, looking down at his loose wool shirt hanging off his, mostly, thin frame. He wondered if it was strange for the younger kids to see him wearing something so, well, normal. It wasn't often he went through the day wearing no leather or armor, aside from a few chiefly items he knew he'd need. But the day was calm with warm, clear skies. Sometimes it was okay to be comfortable. Hey. Hiccup turned at the sound of his wife's voice, but his eyes widened when he saw her. She wasn't dressed any different than usual, a fitted wool top, armored skirt with dark leggings, headband and boots. She looked the same as she always did. Maybe it was the fact that she wore the headband he'd made for her 20th birthday or that her hair was draped across her shoulder in a golden braid. Whatever it was, it seemed to steal his breath away. Hiccup. Astrid waved a hand in his face. He shook himself, pulling out of his trance. Sorry. Are you okay? Yeah. Hiccup crossed his arms, darting a look down to stare at his boots but glancing across her body instead. He cleared his throat. I'm fine. Astrid stared at him quizzically. Are you sure? Because you're acting weird. Stupid. His wife smiled mischievously. Funny. Me, funny. Ha. Hiccup half turned, looking away. I don't know what you're talking about, Astrid. Is there something you wanted to ask me? Ask you? Hiccup shook his head. No, definitely not. No. No. Hiccup fought the urge to smirk as he shook his head. Her blue eyes glittered with amusement, nearly making him choke on his tongue. And nothing at all. Nothing here from Hiccup. Nope, he's definitely just being stupid, as per usual. Oh, shut up. Astrid pulled him down by the shirt and kissed him firmly. Hiccup's eyes fluttered shut and he deepened the kiss, resting his hands on her shoulders. She gave a soft sigh, but pulled away all too soon. Hiccup nearly pouted when she stood in front of him, ignoring Tough Nut's catcall nearby. She brushed her bangs out of her eyes and sighed. I have to do laundry. Hiccup frowned sympathetically. And I have a harvest meeting in 20 minutes. Okay. Well, I'll see you tonight. Astrid pecked his lips a final time before walking to Stormfly, conversing with Toothless nearby. Hiccup watched her go from the middle of the street, arms crossed. He chewed his cheek pensively, wishing he could go home and spend time with her. This was the first time in a long, long time that he was really feeling anything. He knew she has been patient for most of the summer, probably longer, for him to come around, but things got out of hand and he'd gotten carried away. But the way she teased him last night, he'd been thinking about it most of the morning. Even after all these years, she still drove him crazy. And now he had to get stuck in another stupid meeting and sacrifice more time that he should be spending with his wife. He was tired of meetings and deadlines and rowdy teenagers and stress and worry and... Hiccup stopped in his tracks. He was the chief. He'd been working his tail off the entire summer without stopping, without taking a break, without taking time for himself, and his wife was the one suffering for it. They were suffering for it. If he was never home and never made time for his family, things were bound to get haywire. Maybe that was another reason things have gotten so out of hand recently. But he couldn't keep putting things off with Astrid. He had enough problems in his life. He didn't need to have marital issues on top of it. He wanted to be there for his wife, he wanted a break from the rest of the world, just for an afternoon. And he was the chief. He was allowed to make that call now and then. Hiccup exhaled slowly, glancing around the half-full square. Nobody seemed to notice his inner musings as he stood in the middle of the street. He noticed a few councilmen who'd surely be in the Great Hall soon for the meeting. He dashed the thought of cancelling the meeting altogether. He didn't feel like explaining himself. For the first time in a long while, Hiccup Horrendous Haddock III was skipping out on an important meeting. And he wasn't going to tell a soul about it. Even though he had to hide the grin, he felt a thrilling swoop in his stomach. He marched over to Toothless, who was sniffing a bread cart nearby. Hey bud, I need you to do me a favor. He leaned down and whispered something in his ear platelet. Toothless cooed, nodded and promptly licked his face. Yeah, Hiccup laughed. Get out of here. Toothless jumped onto a nearby roof and began running toward the Great Hall. From the rooftops, any councilman could see the Night Fury heading that direction, and they would head over. But they didn't know that their chief was in fact heading in the other direction. It would take a while for them to realize that he wasn't there. It would take them even longer to realize he wasn't coming. Astrid hauled a wide bin of dirty clothes to the wash tub. Resting the bin on the edge, she began throwing clothes into the warm, bubbly water. The bucket was almost empty when she heard the front door close. Audrey, is that you? Can you bring me any dirty clothes from your bedroom? No response came other than muffled footsteps, which stopped at the doorway. Confused, she turned expectantly to look at her daughter, but instead saw her husband, leaning against the doorway with a warm smile. Oh! Astrid said in surprise. She shoved her hand into the water and violently shook it back and forth to create bubbles. What are you doing here? I thought you had a meeting. I do. Did you need something? Hiccup breathed a short laugh behind her. You could say that. Astrid quirked an eyebrow at him over her shoulder in confusion. Are you sure you're feeling okay? I feel fine, Hiccup hummed, watching her work. Great, actually. Well, if you're so great, then why don't you bring me that other load of laundry over there? Her husband grinned. Can do, milady. Astrid watched him grab a basket of Adriana's clothes and bring it over to her. She wasn't sure why, but little details began to stand out about him, the way he picked up the loaded basket with ease, his lean muscles tightening underneath his distinctly leatherless outfit, how his eyes glittered when he walked over and handed her the basket, staring down at her with a look she hadn't seen in a long, long time. She pushed the distracting thoughts aside as she took the basket. Thank you. Astrid began throwing clothing into the water, shoving them deeper when the pile didn't sink. Then, she felt the brush of his fingertips at the nape of her neck. Surprised, Astrid stiffened. What are you doing? Hiccup stepped closer, ducking his head to brush his mouth against the shell of her ear. Astrid fought the urge to shiver. Nothing, he murmured. Nothing. Yeah, the warmth of his breath on her neck was nothing. Or his hands slowly wrapping around her belly to pull her against his warm chest in that thin wool shirt he wore today. Or the fact that his lips were now on her neck below her ear, warm and inviting. Astrid squirmed, biting her lip to withhold the squeal threatening to escape. It had been so long since they'd done anything like this, she felt her resolve crumbling quite rapidly. But she steeled herself. If he wanted to play this game, she needed to play hard to get. Just to watch him crumble. Astrid turned out of his hold, his lips leaving her neck with a pop as she did so. She gave him a teasing smile as she stepped around the tub, plunging various items of clothing into the water as she went. She stood across from him, unable to hide the smirk as he stared at her with vibrant green eyes. Hiccup leaned his hands against the wooden edge and murmured, "Let's not be cruel." Had his voice just dropped lower? Her toes danced in her boots at the look he was giving her, but she hid her excitement. Cruel? Astrid asked in a lilting voice. Who's being cruel? You, he replied, stepping toward her around the edge. Me? How am I being cruel? Astrid stepped in the opposite direction. Oh, I don't know, lots of ways, Hiccup said, still trying to catch up to her. For one, your beauty kills me every day. What, like this thick mop of hair? Astrid teased, knowing how much he loved her hair. Hiccup continued, you're still as strong and smart as you were back then. You haven't changed much at all. The woman I fell in love with never left. You haven't changed much either. Astrid quickly stepped away from his hand. Finally, Hiccup caught her arm and pulled her to him once more. And the fact that you're teasing me right now is driving me insane. Astrid gave a mocking gasp. Teasing? Me? She watched as his eyes turned dark with desire and her heart rate accelerated. You know what I mean. No. Astrid pulled away, edging toward the doorway, keeping up the facade. She could see him growing restless by the second. You're crazy. Hiccup stepped around her, blocking the doorway. It's quite simple really. Oh. Do explain. Her husband swallowed. I don't know if I can do that. Astrid hooded her eyes and she stepped up to him. She could see his pulse pounding at his neck. Then show me. Hiccup pulled her to his body as close as he could, capturing her mouth with his. Astrid sighed, dragging her damp hands into his thick hair. Her husband kissed her passionately, pushing her into the wall until her form was straight between him and the wood. He tilted her neck up with his hands and kissed her with fast movements, barely taking time to breathe. She loved it when she could bend him to her will like that, tease him to the point that all he could do was be consumed by her. Attacking his mouth just as passionately, Astrid swung a leg past his hips and pulled herself higher. Hiccup wrapped his arms around her waist and pulled her other leg around his waist, suspending her in the air. Astrid groaned against his mouth when he pushed her farther into the wall. After so long, the feeling was indescribable. She couldn't remember the last time he'd pinned her against a wall like this or kissed her so fervently. He wasn't usually so passionate. But times had been rough and it had been a long, long time. Astrid dragged her nails down his back inside his shirt, making him moan against her mouth. Astrid. Home. Where's Addy? Astrid tried to think through the fog in her brain. Be babysitting, she panted. She won't be home for a long time. Good. Hiccup breathed, staring deeply into her eyes. She donned a serious expression for a moment. Aren't you supposed to be somewhere? Astrid asked teasingly. Harvest meeting. Hiccup's eyes trailed up from her chest to her face, nearly making her squirm in his arms. Your point. Astrid shook her head, staring at his mouth in anticipation. Bedroom. Now. Astrid gave a light squeal in surprise when Hiccup pulled her away from the wall and carried her out the door. Even after so many years of marriage, his strength always did surprise her. Astrid held on to his shoulders, teasing him further by dropping sloppy kisses along his scruffy jaw and neck. Hiccup nearly tripped on the last step, but finally, he kicked the bedroom door closed and collapsed on top of her in their bed. In moments, she yanked his shirt off and threw it onto the floor. Hiccup pulled hers over her head before ducking down to lay hot kisses across her chest. He spread his hands along her torso, soaking in her skin and making her whimper. Hiccup. I love you. Hiccup trailed his mouth up her neck and finally dragged his lips against hers. I love you too. You're so amazing. So are you. Astrid gave him a wolfish smile before wrapping her leg around his thigh, pulling on his arm and flipping them in one solid movement. Oh, but I liked being on TMMPH. Hiccup's partial whine was cut off when she silenced him with a kiss. His hands wandered the planes of her back while she plundered his mouth. Hiccup went boneless under her except for his hands playing with the edge of her chest binding. In the back of her mind, she couldn't decide what she loved more, being pleasured or pleasuring him. In the end, it didn't matter. Despite the hardship they'd gone through, it was just another day in their wild, crazy life. They'd learned long ago that love and trust in their spouse was the key to surviving hardships. There was a connection that went deeper than skin, a promise that surpassed words. As long as they had each other, they could move mountains, one stone at a time. Finn stood outside the tavern with a dull frown, waiting patiently for Rain to emerge. She'd asked him to meet her here once her work shift ended. The darkening sky looked bleak in the late evening. It was going to rain tonight, he could smell it in the air. He still felt a knot of depression weighing him down. He felt purposeless, like a ship with a broken rudder. But the forge worked during the day, and talking things over with Rain as often as he could, not without a little amount of flirting as well, he felt like he could survive this. He still felt cast out and downtrodden, but at least he wasn't completely alone. Rain. Gods, she was beautiful. He felt the same as he had when he first met her the other day. She was a natural beauty with an open heart and listening ear. She spoke wise words that he hadn't heard before, and even when it hurt, she spoke the truth. He could admire all of these qualities. But the more time he spent with her, he couldn't help but feel very attracted to her. He was just telling himself to get a grip when the door swung open and Rain stepped out. Hey. Hi. Finn smiled, pushing off the wall. Where we going? Oh, I just figured we could go for a walk before it rains. It's supposed to be stormy for the next few days. Days? I can understand tonight, but days? How can you tell? Finn asked. The fishermen were talking about it all day, Rain replied, leading him through the streets. I guess they can tell these things. Ah. Okay. Silence followed as they walked through the streets. Finn kept his eyes on the ground, occasionally glancing over at Rain's leather boots. He couldn't help but admire the shape of her legs under her leggings, or the way her belt cinched at her waist just right. The more time he spent with her, the more he couldn't deny his attraction for her. But he kept his hands stuck deep in his pockets, unwilling to make a fool of himself. She probably didn't even see him like that. Finn. The haddock boy looked up. Rain stared at him in the evening light, her blue eyes shining. She came to a stop in the middle of the dark alley, watching him. Finally, she quietly asked, Do you know how long you'll be on Braun? Finn winced. I don't know. I guess however long I need to, until I come up with a plan or figure out what I want to do. I want to help you. Help me? Finn echoed. How could you possibly help me with this? You've already helped me a lot with advice or just listening. You can't fix my problems, Rain. I just want to see you happy, Rain said. You're a great guy, and I hate seeing that glum look on your face. I want to make it go away. Finn lightly scoffed, looking at his boots. It would take a lot to make it go away. Rain slowly stepped forward in the darkness, ducking a bit to catch his eye. Finn's heart froze at how close in proximity she suddenly was. Then, without warning, she kissed him. Her lips were soft, smooth and warm, the first kiss testing his reaction. Then she stepped even closer, pressing her mouth fully against his, tilting her head to deepen the kiss further. Finn's head spun. Rain definitely had experience kissing, but this knowledge didn't deter him. In a moment of boldness, he caught her bottom lip between his teeth. Rain gasped and pushed him into the wall behind him, shoving her hands into his hair. She wanted him. He could feel it under his hands by the way she hummed when he pulled her into his chest. He'd kissed a few different girls now, but they were nothing like Rain. Helga had been innocent, Dana was uncensored and rough. Rain was both confident and gentle, leading and demanding. Willing. Finn threw all propriety out the window. Twisting so he pinned her against the wall, Finn kissed her passionately. He pressed a knee up between her legs, making her squeal and claw at the back of his shirt. Finn, she gasped into his shirt when he moved to her neck. Finn didn't reply. Finn. He pulled away from her neck with a panting sigh. What? What do you want? Finn stared into her eyes, his heart rate picking up even more than he thought possible. I think you know. Rain smiled knowingly and gave him a sloppy kiss. Then follow me. Where are we going? Finn asked. He hated stopping while things were getting so heated up. My house. Finn gulped. Wouldn't your family be home? I live with my sister Sophie, but she's on vacation. Remember? Oh yeah. Finn felt a thrilling swoop in his stomach when he realized they'd be alone. No adults, no parents, no sisters to drop in and stop them. If he knew where her house was, he was positive he'd be dragging her across the town to get there. Luckily, Rain seemed just as urgent. As they jogged through the dark streets, she kept giving him warm smiles over her shoulder that kept him moving forward. He wanted that smile to be the last thing he saw tonight. Finally, she led them to a small house at the end of the village. As she opened the door, Finn vaguely thought there were less neighbors in the vicinity as well, so this boded well. He briefly wondered if he should be thinking of all these things, but soon after Rain yanked him inside. The house was dark, but Rain dragged him toward the back where a staircase led to the upstairs. She went up 2 stairs, but Finn stopped. She looked down at him curiously. What is it? Come here. Finn yanked her toward him. He wanted to carry her up the stairs. He needed to feel strong again. Rain complied, even going so far as to wrap her legs around his hips. He exhaled shakily, taking the stairs as quickly as he could. Rain opened the door and pushed it open. Finn walked in, and when he saw her bed, all thoughts instantly disappeared from his head. He dropped Rain onto her bed and clambered after her. Rain clutched at his shirt while he kissed her, fumbling at the edges of her shirt as he went. Once discarded, Finn ran his hands down the pale skin of her chest and belly. She was so much different than Helga and Dana in that they were muscular and fit, hardened by dragon riding and battle training. Rain was soft and smooth, unblemished by weapons or dragon scales. Her skin curved and glowed in the candlelight. Finn swallowed, drinking in the sight of her lying in front of him. Enjoying the view? Rain asked in a sultry voice. Her eyes drank in the sight of his bare torso with a hungry glint. I have to be strong. Finn growled lowly in his throat. Take that off. Rain gave him a heated smile, sitting up on her elbows to comply. Finn had never seen a bare woman before, but his heart pounded in his chest in anticipation. When Rain threw her breast binding onto the floor, all he could do was stare, transfixed. He couldn't seem to move or think or breathe. Finn, Rain whispered, drawing closer. Her lips ghosted over his seductively, then pulled away. Finn's eyes fluttered shut, but at the last second he caught the victorious look in her eye. You're so cruel, he muttered haggardly before pressing her down onto the bed. He captured her mouth in his, aching to feel every curve of her body pressed against his. He felt her half-clothed body beneath him, every patch of soft, supple skin against his own. He could barely think about anything but one single thought. I deserve this. Rain didn't make it easier when she wrapped a leg around his waist and pulled him closer. He gasped and pulled away from her mouth, suddenly transfixed on a single point. Rain seemed to sense his thoughts and dragged her free leg up the back of his leg whilst giving him a smile. "We're only halfway there, Haddock," she whispered into his ear. "What do you want?" Finn lost it. The next minute was a blur of activity as all remaining clothing was shed between them. Finn felt himself losing control rapidly as he kissed her and felt her soft skin moving beneath him. He'd never felt euphoria like this before, and his life had been such a living hell in the past almost 3 years, he could barely stand the thought of going back. All he wanted to do was to lose himself for a time. He didn't want to think about the pain and sadness anymore. He wanted to be happy, he wanted to be strong. Could he be both? Instinctively, he wrapped an arm around Rain's waist and pulled her closer. Burying his face in her neck, he prepared himself when Rain's firm voice interrupted, "Wait. Wait." They both froze, panting for a few seconds when Finn suddenly realized something. "Finn, are you crying?" He was. He hadn't even realized it. But suddenly the emotion surged forward and a sob racked his system. Rain untangled herself from his limbs and wrapped her arms around his head. "What's wrong?" Finn shook his head. He didn't even know anymore. Here he was, willing to give himself up to a girl he barely knew, on the very cusp of doing so, and he broke down. "Finn?" Rain gently asked in his ear. "Listen to me, okay? I don't think we should do this." The boy buried his face into her neck further and sniffled. "I'm such a waste." "No. No, you're not, Finn. I'm so tired of being weak and alone. I don't know how much more of this I can take." Rain was silent for a few minutes while Finn tried to rein in his emotions. Finally, she spoke, "Finn, look at me." She waited patiently for him to raise his head and make eye contact. The look of pity in her eyes mixed with the sight of her messed up hair gave him a set of confusing emotions that he didn't know what to do with. "We shouldn't do this. It wouldn't make you feel better. In fact, I think it would make you feel worse. Rain, I need this. I need to do something." "Honey, sex doesn't make things better," Rain said sympathetically. "I shouldn't have brought it upon you because right now, this is the last thing you need. When your heart is hurting and you're grieving, this isn't something you want to do to try to make yourself feel better. It will only leave you emptier." "I can't possibly get emptier than this," Finn mumbled. "I wanted to make you happy," Rain said quietly. "If I allow us to do this, you won't feel happy." Finn sighed, rubbing his puffy eyes. He wanted to. He wanted it so badly. He could still do it too. She was still lying beneath him, skin on skin. But when he looked into her eyes, she saw genuine sympathy and fear. He could see it there in the way her shoulders tensed slightly and her hand holding his tightly. At this point, it wasn't about what was wise for him anymore. She didn't want it. Even though he could easily overpower her and get what he daily wanted, the thought sickened him. He hadn't noticed his own emotional state, and even better, he hadn't noticed her taking notice of his emotional state. He wanted it, felt like he deserved it even, but she didn't. He could see in her eyes that she was done. He wouldn't force himself on her, no matter how hard it would be to stop. At long last, Finn sat up and sat on the edge of the bed, fumbling for his pants. He could hear Rain rustling in a drawer to probably clothe herself as well. He kept his eyes on the floor as he quickly dressed, unwilling to look at her body again. He didn't trust himself. He began to pull on his shirt when a hand on his shoulder stopped him. "Finn, do you want to stay the night?" Finn looked up at her, trying to ignore the lightweight shirt she wore with shorts. He shook his head. "What do you want me to do? This isn't about me." Rain sat beside him and held his hand. "I won't throw you out if you don't want to go back to the Chiefs tonight. You can stay here." The boy fought the emotion welling up in his throat. He wanted to stay. He didn't want to go back to another happy house to lie awake all night long. Rain gently turned his cheek to face her. "Stay." Finn choked back the tears but finally nodded. Come on, Rain nodded back toward the bed. Together they snuggled in, Finn wrapping an arm around her shoulders as she snuggled into his side. Rain blew out the candles, casting the room in darkness. Finn could still feel the warmth in the sheets from their earlier activities, but he forced those thoughts out of his mind. He didn't want to give her no choice but to throw him out if he couldn't control himself. "Good night, Finn," Rain whispered. Finn swallowed. "Night, Rain." Nearly 20 minutes later, Rain's breathing evened out and she relaxed against his arm. Finn stared at the ceiling, wondering just what exactly he was doing anymore. He felt as if he'd lost everything he'd held dear, his family, his morals, his sanity. It would take a miracle to turn things around. Except he wasn't turning around. He was heading farther and farther away from everything he'd ever known. Burke, his parents, his twin sister, his friends. Benen. He'd always relied on Benen's strength to make decisions. He prided himself on making decisions. But it seemed that since he'd left Burke, his very foundations had been rocked. Fearless Finn didn't know who he was or what he wanted. He didn't know where he was going or what the next step in the plan was. For once in his life, he didn't have a plan. He didn't have an agenda. He didn't have anything to prove because he felt totally, truly worthless. And nothing on the horizon said that he could change the course of his future. Chapter 22, The Heiress. Chapter text. It was a fitful night. Sleep eluded the Haddock boy as images stemmed his vision. The smell of blood choked him, the sight of Benen and Eric howling in agony sending waves of panic through his system. His father's final words rang out through the darkness. "I don't want to hear it. Get out of my sight." Sharp pain emitted from his stomach and he jerked. Finn vaguely heard a female voice talking to him, something about holding still, but the words were lost as he rolled over and slipped back into unconsciousness. Thankfully, he slipped into less than terrifying sleep. In the dreams that followed, Finn could see Benen walking ahead of him in an endless maze of darkened hallways. Benen seemed to be holding out a hand, calling to him, beckoning his little boy to hurry. But no matter how fast Finn ran, his old friend always managed to make a sharp turn and disappear down a hall just as he extended his hand. "You must be strong," Benen called, holding out a hand. "I'm trying." Finn panted, sprinting. "Patience," Benen said, turning down a hall. "All good things come to those who wait." For hours, Finn watched the dream unfold. Countless encouragements from Benen to be strong and patient and kind bombarded him, but Benen himself eluded him. Just when Finn thought he might crumple to the smoky floor and cry, he felt a shift in the ground beneath him and he jolted awake. Finn sharply inhaled, staring around the dim room. His clammy skin felt chilled against the morning air. The blankets pooled around his waist and if not for his utter confusion, he might have pulled them up to his neck and gone back to sleep. He caught sight of a small bureau next to the bed with jewelry, paper and a quill scattered across the top. He didn't remember seeing this before, but a quick glance at the floor below saw a heap of familiar clothing that sent his heart shooting up his throat. Rain. Oh gods. Finn dropped his head into the pillow, guilt building in his stomach like water filling a jar. His heart constricted and he swallowed the bile rising in his throat. He'd almost given up his virginity last night. He'd been completely, unabashedly willing to go through with it, start to finish. If he hadn't noticed the look on Rain's face, he probably would have done it too. How could he have been so stupid? How could he have allowed himself to indulge in a fantasy so primal, so selfish and lucid, that he'd give up the very thing he could never get back again? Finn slowly exhaled. He and Rain had to talk about this. He felt something with her for sure, his feelings weren't entirely misplaced. She was smart and kind, she was a good companion to have when his world was turned to rot. But they had to talk about everything. She was right about one thing, he wasn't ready for intimacy. He simply wasn't in a right position, let alone his age. Add that to the list of things his father would kill him for, if he found out. "Morning," a melodic voice said from the foot of the bed. Finn turned his head and tried for a smile. Rain looked down at him with a warm, knowing smile. "So you nearly strangled me last night." Finn felt heat rise to his face. He shifted to an elbow, scratching his head. Did I hurt you? Rain blinked. Oh. No, no, not that. You were thrashing in your sleep, I mean. I had to elbow you to get you off, she giggled. Oh. Finn vaguely remembered a sharp pain in his stomach that woke him for a split second during the night. Sorry. It's okay. Rain sat down on the side of the bed beside him. And no, you didn't hurt me. At all. The boy swallowed with a nod. Gee, good. They sat in awkward silence for a moment. Finn suddenly felt very exposed, lying in her bed with only pants on beneath the blankets, but of course only his bare top half was showing. She'd convinced him to stay the night before he'd pulled his shirt over his head, and apparently he'd decided it wasn't worth the effort or something, because she was definitely looking at his toned bare chest right now. No time like the present, Finn thought. So, what's the plan? Rain's blue eyes met his. Well, I have to go to work in an hour. Oh, Finn sat up. I didn't mean the schedule, I meant with us. Us? Rain raised an eyebrow in confusion. Finn glanced away. Well, yeah. I mean, what are we now? Are we dating now or? Dating? Rain asked in surprise. No, I don't date. The boy stared at her. You don't date? What's that supposed to mean? Rain shrugged, giving him a shy smile. I like nice men. I'm a very social creature. I like to meet new people, and if I click with someone, I like to have some fun. But I don't choose just anyone, mind you, they have to meet a certain criteria, if you catch my drift. Finn was confused. Criteria? Rain blinked. Realization seemed to dawn on her and she tensed. Wait. Was last night your first time? If we'd done it. Finn flushed. Yes. Oh. Rain whispered. Shoot. Wait, fun? Finn asked. You sleep with guys, for fun? Rain shrugged half-heartedly. I told you, I'm a social. What does that even mean? Finn stood and walked away from her, suddenly defensive. What are you? A prostitute? No. Rain stood up, eyes wide. No, not at all. I don't get paid to do this or anything, I just. She shrugged. I meet people, and if we make a connection and the guy is willing, sometimes I bring them home. Finn's head spun. You don't even like me, do you? Of course, I like you, Rain said sympathetically. I didn't do this to be a bad guy, I do like you. You're a really nice guy. No, you just wanted me because you think I'm attractive. Finn cried. You just wanted to sleep with me this whole time, that was your agenda. Not entirely, I really was interested in your story when we first met. Oh gods, what if you'd gotten pregnant? Finn gasped in horror. Rain frowned. Finn. No, I'm the heir of a tribe, is that what you wanted? For me to get you pregnant so you'd, what, try to take the throne or some? Finn. Rain shouted in annoyance. You're being ridiculous. The look she was giving him made him stop. I would never do that. I wouldn't go through that many lengths for something so trivial, that's silly. I'm not like other women. I see a guy, we have a connection, we may or may not sleep together, we move on with our lives. I drink tea when it happens so I don't get pregnant. Oh gods. Finn turned and pressed his forehead into the wall. What had he done? We didn't even have sex, Finn. Rain said behind him calmly. You don't have anything to worry about. I shouldn't have even come here, Finn murmured. Of all the stupid, reckless, pointless things I could have done, it was this. Brushing past her, he grabbed his shirt and yanked it over his head. Rain watched him pull on his boots and jacket with a morose expression. Finn, I really do like you. I just don't do commitments. Then what do you do? Take advantage of people. Finn growled, tears stinging his eyes. I'm madder at myself, but why the heck you don't even know me? And after hearing about all the garbage in my life, what made you think that this was what I needed? You wanted it. Rain said. And I don't typically ask people how many times they've done it. I didn't know you were a virgin. The situation rolled over him again and Finn stood, eyes burning with unshed tears. Well, I am. Or at least, I was. We didn't do it, so technically you still are. For how much I was going for it, I'm basically not. Finn said bitterly. So here's my list of accomplishments. I'm a liar, a vandal, a disobedient, proud and bitter brat who has no family, friends, life, or future, who has nothing left other than the clothes on his back, and less dignity than that of the dragon dung sitting in the nearest dragon pen outside. But heck, I still have my virginity in a rare bout of sanity, so I'm just soaring to new heights. Finn, don't go. Rain grabbed his arm as he grabbed the door handle. The teenager yanked his hand away and stomped down the stairs, tears streaming down his face. Just leave me alone, Rain. No, I'm seriously worried about you. Rain stood in front of him at the bottom. Please, I won't ask for anything short of staying with me just so I can help you get you back on your feet again. You're important and you're smart, I don't want you to. Stop. Finn closed his eyes and turned away. Just go to work. But. Please just go. Rain stood in silence for a few moments before finally turning. He heard her gather things for work throughout the room. He didn't look at her. The guilt building in his chest was hard enough knowing she was still here. Finally, the door opened, but the girl paused at the doorstep. I really am sorry, Finn. Rain said in a small, pained voice. I never meant to hurt you. I did want to help. She paused. I hope you find what you're looking for. With that, Rain stepped outside and gently shut the door. Finn drank in the silence, but couldn't help the waves of hysteria rising in his chest. He slowly sat down on the stairs and buried his face in his hands. He could remember flirting with her that first night in the tavern long after Trader Johann and Chief Kara had left. He could still feel her lips on his and her skin moving silkily against his body. But instead of ecstasy and raw passion, he felt dirty, impure. He'd made a horrible, horrible mistake that, once again, he couldn't reverse. No matter what he did, he just couldn't seem to make the right decision. His parents were amazing people, his Poppy, his lineage. All great men and women. Even his sister had been kind and gentle with people as a little girl. Maybe he hadn't inherited that gene. Once again, wanderlust choked him. He had to find Tornado and Sharpshot and leave. Now. Rising from his seat and roughly wiping his face on his sleeve, Finn stormed out the door and into the street. He passed people, ignoring curious looks and calls from marketers. People beckoned to him to buy their wares, foods and beverages. He couldn't find it in himself to want anything. Everything was vanity. Everything was pointless. Life no longer had meaning for the chief of Berk's son. At long last, he finally found his two dragons by the port. Unfortunately, they stood next to a familiar figure, Johann. Master Finn. Johann greeted him jovially. Where were you last night? The chief said you didn't stay at her home last night. Ignoring the trader, Finn pulled a hooded jacket out of his bag on Tornado's back. He threw it on and yanked up the hood, hiding his layered mop of bright red hair from passers-by. Finn, are you all right? Again, Finn ignored the man. Do you have paper? Johann stared at him in concern. Yes. Can I have a piece? Just one is fine. Finn, talk to him. Please, Johann, I just need to send my parents a message. Finn faced his old family friend with wide eyes. Johann looked stricken. Finn, I'll give you whatever you need. But I'm concerned for your safety. I think you should go home. Finn shook his head. I can't go home. Don't you remember what happened last time you said that to me? Johann asked quietly. Do you know how terrified I was, knowing that I'd been the last one who knowingly saw you before you were taken away? Finn stared at his saddle morosely, remembering that day on Rune. I thought your father was going to kill me. I so dearly wanted to reverse time and do everything I could to keep you in my clutches while I had you. I didn't pay enough attention as the responsible adult and good friend to your family. The same goes for today, Johann pleaded. I'm going to Berk next, but it will take me at least a day or two to get there. Come with me. We can sort things out. I'd never forgive myself if something happened to you after this and I had to face your father again. Not again, Finn. I can't do that to him again. Finn stood in sullen silence for a minute. I just need paper, Johan. Please. Johan's shoulders slumped. Please. I just want to help you, Finn. The teenager's eyes welled with tears and he was sure they were red and puffy by this point. You can't help me, Johan. I'm a lost cause. I'm sending my parents a message and then I have some unfinished business to attend to. Now do I need to find paper elsewhere? Johan sighed. No. Wait here. Finn leaned against Tornado's side wearily as he waited, pressing his palms against the sides of his head. Sharpshot cooed at him in concern. Holding back all this emotion was only building pressure inside his head, concocting a raging headache. He gritted his teeth and pulled his hair between his fingers, willing himself to hold on just a few more minutes. Any random passers-by probably thought he was about to have a mental breakdown. He probably was. Johan finally reemerged from his ship with a few papers. Here, lad. Thanks, Johan. Finn stuffed them inside his satchel and slid onto Tornado's back. The dragon stretched his wings in anticipation with a low growl. Where will you go, Finn? Johan asked sadly. Far away from here. Will I see you again? The question startled Finn. He looked down at the old man with wide eyes, and in those pools of blue he only found compassion. Finn gulped and looked away. Just tell my parents not to worry. Take care of yourself, fearless Finn. Pulling on the reins, Finn urged Tornado into the air with Sharpshot hot on their heels. Within seconds, Johan disappeared into the distance and Brawn gradually began to shrink. The teenager steered his dragon north, to the only place he could think of to go. Not for sanctuary, but to face off with his old enemy. Rain had said something about going to the root of the problem. He knew exactly who the root of his problems was. And he knew exactly where to find him. However, that trip would take hours. He'd have to stop now and then to let Tornado eat. He wondered if he'd ever eat again. The thought of food made his stomach turn and he curled in on himself. He thought over last night's events and he couldn't help the pang of guilt. Never before had Finn felt so dirty. He'd already felt like a terrible person, with what happened to Eric and the gang and his father. But this, making out with girls, seemed to be one thing. He'd felt some inner drive when Dana was lying on top of him. She was dangerous fuel for the fire inside him that didn't want to be extinguished. He'd felt guilt when Adriana eventually got Dana to leave. Dana, of all people. Everyone knew just how trashy she was. But he'd been blinded by just how deceptively sweet a girl could be. Rain honestly didn't seem to be a bad person. She was kind and pretty in a natural way, and she could kiss like nobody's business. But he had no business being there. She shouldn't have come on to him, but he should have had the sense to make a better decision than this. He knew better. If he'd used 2 brain cells, he might have seen this coming beforehand. Tavern worker, blatant flirting, low neckline but not too revealing, coy glances as she served the men. She might not get paid for having sex with random men, but Finn certainly felt like he'd been cheated and abused. He never thought he'd come so close to giving up his virginity to a random woman from a tavern in Brawn. He'd made his decision at the heart of it. He knew what was right and wrong. He should never have put himself in any position such as that, but he'd been testing those boundaries with Helga long ago. But there were big differences between Helga, Dana and Rain. No, he didn't deserve anyone or anything. If he couldn't respect himself, then he didn't deserve another person. He just kept digging the hole bigger. And that's why he was writing a note to his parents. He couldn't do this to them anymore. There would be no false hopes or endless pain for them. No constant wondering. He was done. For once in a long time, he was doing something right. He hoped. Hiccup had to admit, things could always get worse. His father used to say that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Something about his lifelong motto, even though the famous stoic the Vast almost never spoke the phrase, that's what Hiccup thought at the end of the day. At first, the day had been sweet, filling it with Astrid and only Astrid. When he awoke to sunlight streaming through the windows and his wife already awake, smiling at him through a sleepy haze, he couldn't help but feel his heart leap a bit. He didn't even feel bad that he'd skipped his meeting the day before and literally hadn't left the house since. Their daughter had come home sometime in the evening to find them sitting on the couch in cozy sweatpants and nursing mugs of tea, to which she gave them a confused look. Long day was the excuse he'd given. But he hoped the happy glow in his wife's cheeks didn't give anything away to their 15-year-old daughter. Adriana didn't seem to make any connections. She'd merely given them a half-hearted shrug and marched upstairs to read. After a leisurely breakfast the next morning with Adriana and Brandine, the chief and his wife strolled toward the village hand in hand. Their dragons bounded through the trees as the bridge came into view. "We should visit the Thorstons," Astrid remarked presently. Hiccup glanced at her in confusion. "Why?" "Because baby therapy." Astrid smiled when Hiccup laughed. "One more thing to loosen you up." Hiccup gave her a look. "After yesterday, I'm loose." "Not loose enough. I can still see it in your eyes." Hiccup nodded. They'd spent many hours talking the night before, both serious issues, especially regarding their son, and goofing off. He felt a lot lighter, his stress levels having waned a bit. But he couldn't rid himself of it completely. Not until his little boy came home. The chief lifted his wife's arm and kissed the back of her hand. "If you insist, lady." Astrid grinned and pulled him across the bridge faster. He nearly tripped over a loose board and glanced over his shoulder, making a mental note to have someone come out and fix that. Wouldn't do to lose someone on the bridge. "Focus, Mr. Haddock," Astrid chimed in front of him. "I'm up here." Hiccup laughed. "Taking me somewhere? You seem to be in a rush." "Yes, the Thorstons. I thought we covered this." "Well, there isn't much privacy there." "Ow." Astrid laughed when as he rubbed his arm. "Vas. Meanie. Dork. Your dork." "Yes." Hiccup grinned at the ground, amazed that after all these years he was still the one man in the entire archipelago that was allowed to flirt with Astrid Horferson. "Love you too." "Oh, stop that," a voice called from nearby. "You both make me sick like back in the old days." Astrid waved a hand at Gobber cutely. "Sorry Gobber, some things never change." I can see that." Gobber sent the couple a look as they marched by in passing. Astrid pulled her husband along until finally the Thorstons' home came into view. Inside they could hear a baby girl's wails echoing through the new pine walls. As Astrid knocked, Hiccup stepped back on the porch to survey the newly built home. "Wow, they did a good job, didn't they?" "Yeah." Tough Nuts excited because he requested a ball pit for the backyard. "No, they didn't." "Oh yes they did. They have a bab." The door opened swiftly, cutting off Hiccup's words. Svala stood there looking frazzled while Ava squirmed in her arms, tears running down her red face. "Hey. What's up?" Astrid stepped forward and offered her arms for the child. "Need a break?" "Could you tell?" Svala smiled and handed over her baby. "Come on in." Hiccup stepped inside, looking around the room for Tough Nut. His eyes finally settled on his friend lying across one of the beams close to the ceiling. "Hey Tough." Tough Nut readjusted his position, felt the wood with a hand, sat up and pulled out a piece of sandpaper. As he began to sand the wood, he gave Hiccup a sly grin. "Hello, how's it going?" He get it." "House?" "Because we got a new house." "Yep, yeah. I got it." Tough. Hiccup snickered. "What are you sanding the wood up there for?" "Because it's my man perch, dude." "Like, have you ever had a man perch?" "Can't say I have, no." "Well, if you did have a man perch, like yours truly, you'd want one that's smooth and comfortable." Tough Nut brandished his sandpaper at the chief. "And last I checked, nobody wanted to ask his wife to pull splinters out of his back end because it wasn't sanded down." "Well," Tough Nut snickered. "My wife's." Hiccup held out his arms. "I'm going to stop you right there." "But." "Nope. This is not Terrible Tales with Tough Time." "Oh." Tough Nut nearly jumped off his man perch. "That should totally be a thing. Terrible Tales with Tough Time. There is, you really have a gift. There is a very specific reason you became chief, that." Hiccup stared at Svala and his wife. Did being born into the bloodline have anything to do with it? PFT, no. Tough Nut crossed his arms. It is simply stated that you have a gift. I mean, look at Ava. She hasn't been this quiet in days. You guys come in here and she's completely silent. Let's not draw attention to it, Svala warned. She might notice that we're noticing and start to cry. Ava looked around the room with wide blue eyes. Spotting Hiccup, she pointed out a chubby finger and gave him a pronounced, "Ga. Ga." Hiccup marched forward. What's harder to say, do you think? Chief or Hiccup? Tough Nut snorted. No, Ga is fine. She's very insistent on these things. Hiccup rolled his eyes, holding out his hands. Come here, sweetness. Ava eagerly held out her arms, accepting his embrace. Wow, he glanced at Svala. She's gotten heavy the last few months. You're telling me? Svala sighed, plopping onto the couch. Aren't you usually working? Astrid asked as she sat down. Yes, but Grandma Ingerman gave me the day off. How's Eric? Hiccup's smile waned. He's okay. Still hasn't woken up, but he's made some progress, moves now and then. Svala nodded. Okay. Tough Nut suddenly gasped and jumped down from his man perch. Dude, you have to see my bore pit. I was going to ask about the safety regulations on this decision, Hiccup muttered as he followed the tall blonde out the back door, Ava cooing in his arms. As soon as the door closed, Svala turned to Astrid. He looks better. A lot better. Astrid nodded, unable to hide her smile. We got some alone time yesterday. Oh. Svala's eye twinkled. Oh, shut up. Svala snickered. No, I'm not making fun. I was just thinking about time. Astrid rolled her eyes. He's been busy. More like an obsessed workaholic who's been a recluse to his wife. He couldn't help it, Astrid sighed, hand on her forehead. Finn stepping away has given him a chance to focus on other things. Mainly you, Svala smirked. Astrid ignored her comment. So hopefully things can smooth out in time for Finn to come home. Svala paused, weighing her words. Astrid watched her expression. Do you know when he's coming back? Astrid looked at the floor. No. But he'll come home. I know he will. I'm sure, Svala nodded. I just... What? What if he takes a lot longer than we think? What if he's gone for months, or even years? Please don't, Astrid stopped her. I can't afford to think like that. He'll come back when he's ready. That's all I need to think about it. Svala looked like she wanted to say more, but she held back. The back door presently swung open as the men and Ava re-entered the house. Sure she won't fall in there, then I suppose it's not a problem. Just keep that fence on it. Relax, Chiefo, I've got it under wraps. Tough Nut slapped him on the back. Leaning close to his daughter's face, he grinned. Right, baby. Right. Ava wiggled in Hiccup's arms, pressing her arms against her face with a happy grin. She wobbled into Hiccup's neck with a grunt. Careful there, Hiccup smiled, patting her back. Don't hurt yourself. Or break my nose. Break his nose. Tough Nut cheered. Let it be known that my daughter will be the next nosebreaker of the Thorsten clan. Please don't, Svala complained. Oh, what time is the meeting this afternoon? Seeing as you guys didn't show up. Hiccup ignored the look she passed to Astrid. It will be at 1. All right, better make sure my man eats before then. You know it. You should have a date. Hiccup suggested. Just you two. We can stay with Ava. Well, I can. Astrid. Sure. Astrid smiled at the little girl cooing in Hiccup's arms. It'll be fun. Nostalgic even. Quick, let's get out of here before they change their minds. Tough Nut exclaimed, leaping over a chair to get to the front door. We'll be back in an hour. Svala said with a chortle as she watched her husband tear down the path to the village. Thanks so much. It's no problem. Hiccup smiled confidently as Svala shut the door behind her. The confident smile melted instantly when Ava realized what had happened. The baby let out a wail of despair. Her shrill voice echoed off the unfinished roof. "Oh honey, Mommy and Daddy will be back soon," Hiccup said soothingly. "We'll have some fun here, you'll barely notice they're gone." Ava was distraught. Hiccup thought wryly that Astrid was right about the situation being nostalgic. Adriana had been similarly upset if they put her to bed too early, and he remembered being up until the wee hours of the morning rocking her until she finally fell asleep. His heart twinged at the memory. She had been so tiny and cute back then. An innocent little girl who had trusted him completely. He missed those days. "Maybe we should get some toys out," Astrid suggested as Hiccup struggled to keep the flailing baby in his arms. "Yeah, good plan." Hiccup sat down on the floor as Astrid extracted a stuffed Zippy back from a nearby toy box. He perched Ava on his lap as she continued to fuss. "Hey, look at the dragon. Look at the dragon, Ava." Ava's big grey eyes lit up at the sight of the two-headed dragon in Astrid's arms. Her cries quieted and she reached out her little arms. Astrid smiled and gave her the dragon. "See? Still got it," she said triumphantly. "So you have." Hiccup smoothed Ava's hair and watched her play with the toy, eventually putting it in her mouth. "So many memories." Astrid smiled. "Remember when we used to chase Finn down after his baths? He'd run around stark naked until we could catch him." Hiccup laughed. "Hide under furniture so we had to yank him out by the foot. He had that funny squeal when we caught him." Astrid sighed. "He was a character." Adri too. Toothless made her laugh. Hiccup reminisced. He'd plop himself down in front of her and let her use him to stand up. She'd crack up every time he made a noise. He let out a chuckle. I think he started grunting at her just to make her laugh. Gods, I'd forgotten all about that. Astrid smiled. She was adorable. They both were. So was Eric. Hiccup said quietly. "Eric. I've been thinking about it all week." Hiccup admitted, the smile melting off his face. "With everything going on. Do you remember his naming ceremony? Did we go to that?" "Yeah, we did." Hiccup adjusted Ava so that she would be more comfortable on his lap before continuing. "My dad wanted to teach me how to do them, so he made us go. Eric was so small, I almost didn't see him." Astrid paused, thinking about this for a few seconds. "Yes. I do remember that. Magnus was telling everyone who would listen to her that he was her baby brother. Olaf let us hold him after the ceremony." Hiccup grinned, as the image of Eric's little face entered his brain for the first time in years. "I thought I was going to drop him, he was so little." "He smiled at you," Astrid reminded him. "We saw those baby dimples and you just about melted. I remember asking if I could take him home." Hiccup chuckled. "But Olaf was against the idea. I still miss him," Astrid admitted quietly. "Sometimes, when we're in meetings, I look over and expect to see him sitting there. And he's not. I still half expect Binnen to show up on Wednesdays for dinner." Hiccup grinned at Ava when she looked up at him, but a wave of sadness crashed over him. He'd know what to do. What to say. He'd have set Finn straight ages ago. His heart constricted at the memory of his old friend. Finn was right about that. I'd have depended on him. "I think he'd have told you that you needed to take care of this," Astrid said to him in a thoughtful tone. "And he'd have told Finn to talk to you. He always knew when to back off." "True." "Bah." Ava chimed in, apparently annoyed that her caretakers were ignoring her. "That's right, Ava," Hiccup said, his tone cheerful again. "Tell us what you really think." Ava stuck out her tongue at them, making them laugh. She giggled along. "It's hard to stay sad with a happy baby on your lap." Hiccup smiled at the little girl, who reached out and gripped his finger in her little fist. Astrid stared pensively at Ava for a moment before sighing deeply. "I'm sorry, Hiccup." Hiccup looked up at her. "Sorry. For not having more." Astrid continued to stare at the little girl's smiling face. "I know you wanted them. You could have more little girls to dote on or boys to chase around the house. That's not your fault." "I know." Astrid rubbed her hands on her face. "But it feels like I denied you something you really wanted." There's still grandkids. Hiccup shrugged. I mean honestly, yeah, I wanted more. I did for a long time. I wish we'd been able to get to know Darin. The twins would have loved having a baby brother. But sometimes I think that it would have been more drama. More heartache. And it's been tough enough with Finn and Addie, he sighed. Maybe 2 is the perfect number for us after all. Maybe it is. Astrid agreed. But it went by so fast. I miss those baby days. Snuggling with them on the couch, bathing them in the middle of the living room, making them laugh just by acting ridiculous, that was fun. As much as I complained, I really loved it. I did too. Hiccup said sadly. But it's not over yet. We'll weather this storm just like we weathered the others. He reached out and put his hand on top of Astrid's. Together. They leaned forward and kissed each other. Ava squealed. All right, little lady. I think it's your turn to be the center of attention. Hiccup cooed at the baby, who grinned widely at him. They were mostly silent for the rest of the hour, playing with Ava and remembering the early days with their own children. They were having so much fun. They were almost disappointed when Svala and Tough Nut returned just in time for the meeting. After a quick lunch, Hiccup waited patiently as the council members entered the great hall and took their seats around the large table. Snotlout clapped him on the back as he took a seat on the chief's left. Rough Nut gave him a wolfish grin and slid into a seat beside her husband. Astrid promptly joined him at his right and finally, he spoke. All right, let's get things started. Hiccup began. First off, I apologize for my absence yesterday. Where'd you go? Rough Nut interrupted, a cruel glint in her eye. Hiccup shrugged. Nowhere actually. I just didn't show up. You mean we? Astrid smirked. Hiccup flicked her leg, making her snicker as he continued. Winter is almost here. How is stocking the buns coming along? Right on schedule, Fishlegs said. We've got most of our quota of fish and meat stored in the ice room. What about the dragon hangar? Ready for winter, including supply, Snotlout replied. Plus we finished another dozen pens in case we get some new dragons. Great. For the next half hour the chief and his council discussed various issues and tasks around the island. The council noted the couple's energy, wondering if it was their sudden day off or their son's absence that had created this happier atmosphere. Maybe it was a bit of both. Collectively, however, they were unwilling to ask about the Haddock boys' absence. They wouldn't ruin the mood. But fate had other plans. The squeak of a terrible terror interrupted Hiccup mid-sentence. The group looked up to see Sharpshot swoop from the rafters, having entered a terrible terror hole in the roof. The green dragon landed on Hiccup's shoulder and sniffed around in search of a fish. Hang on, there, Hiccup smirked, untying the note from the dragon's leg. Fish are over there, mister. Sharpshot flapped away while the chief unrolled the note and scanned the page. Within seconds, his heart constricted. Hiccup. Astrid leaned forward, grabbing his wrist. Snotlout jumped up. Is he okay? Hiccup shakily exhaled, staring at the note. No. No what? Astrid snatched the note. Rough Nut suddenly appeared at his side with a cup of water. Drink this, you just went white as a sheet. Astrid's gasp forced them to look up. Hiccup watched his wife's face constrict in pain. No. Slamming it onto the table with a loud bang that echoed through the chamber, Astrid stomped away from her husband. Astrid, wait. Hiccup lunged forward and grabbed her arm. Don't go after him. Why not? Astrid whirled on her husband. It's not true. Hiccup forced his emotion down and stood. Astrid. No, Hiccup, he's coming home. Astrid yelled. Even if I have to drag his butt back here, he's coming home. Honey, read the note again. No. Astrid yelled, ignoring the confused, concerned stares from around the room. The burning sensation in her eyes only fueled her anger. No, I'll find him and I'll bring him back here myself if I have to. Hiccup grabbed her arm as gently as he could. You won't find him. Shut up. Astrid shouted, sounding hysterical. I won't let my little boy leave everything he knows. I won't. Astrid. Astrid shoved against his chest but couldn't get free. He's coming back, hiccup. He's coming back, she yelled, punctuating every word with a slap on his chest. Hiccup tugged her into his chest, holding her tight as the tears spilled down her face. No, no, he has to come back. He has to. The council watched as Hiccup buried his face in his wife's neck, her sobs echoing through the otherwise silent chamber. At long last, Gobber inched forward and picked up the piece of paper. I'm sorry. I've made too many mistakes to ever deserve your forgiveness, but I'm sorry. I'm never coming back. Don't try to find me. I'll be long gone before you make it to Braun. Make Adriana heiress. Gods know she deserves it more than I do. Goodbye. No longer your son. Finn. Gobber passed the note to Snotlout with a grim expression. He hobbled over to the haddocks and wrapped his arms around the couple. He watched his old apprentice squeeze his eyes shut as tears rolled down his cheeks. Astrid shook in his arms. Finally, the old blacksmith looked around the room. Council dismissed. The men and women sullenly stood from their seats and walked to the large doors. Only a few stayed for the sake of their friends. Snotlout passed the note to Fishlegs and took his seat again, watching helplessly as two of his childhood friends cried, broken-hearted. He tried to imagine Inga or one of his boys running away and sending him a message stating they'd never come home. He couldn't fathom the pain they must be feeling at having just read their child's final message. The hall remained silent. There were no words to be said. Adriana wasn't oblivious, something was wrong. People were giving her weird looks, a few whispering behind hands as she walked by. She could tell what they were discussing didn't have to do with her appearance, or even about her in general. But the way they looked at her with pity or sadness made her skin crawl. At first she thought something had happened to Eric. Checking in with Mara, however, proved her suspicions false. He was still unconscious, but the healer said she hoped the young man would wake up soon. She left with the instructions to stop by in a few hours. The cold feeling in her stomach didn't leave even after she'd left the village behind. She glanced over her shoulder as she crossed the bridge, wondering if Brandine knew what was going on. When she finally reached her house, she frowned at the sight of Toothless lying on the porch with his head resting on his front paws. Toothless. Adriana crouched to look at him. You sick buddy? Toothless crooned sadly and half-heartedly licked her hand. What's wrong? The door suddenly opened, drawing her attention up the porch. Adriana cocked her head when Heather Jorgensen stepped outside. The dark-haired woman gave her a small smile. Adriana knew that look. What happened? She demanded, rising to her feet. Heather held out her hands in a placating gesture. Anna, it's best if your parents tell you. Her blood ran cold. Finn. Come inside. Despite the fire burning in the center fire pit, Adriana had never known her house to feel so cold. One look at her parents spoke volumes, yet she still didn't know what had happened. Her mother sat at the dining table with a mug of tea, her face red, puffy and drawn tight. Her father sat in the center of the couch with his face buried in his hands. Neither of them moved when she came in nor when Heather gently closed the door behind them. Heather stepped around her and bustled around the room with quiet footsteps. Adriana had never seen her parents look so depressed. Not since, she gulped. Not since she herself had been kidnapped. Shoving back those horrific memories, she gently stepped forward. Daddy. Hiccup didn't move. Adriana looked across the room. Mom. Astrid snapped out of her trance, blue eyes locking on her daughter instantly. She stood and in 3 fluid steps had Adriana wrapped tightly in her arms. The girl could feel her mother shaking. What happened? She asked quietly. Heather rested a hand on both of their shoulders. I'll leave you all alone. Send a terror if you need anything. Astrid gave a single stiff nod before Heather left. She heard the door open and close before she moved. She smoothed her daughter's hair down and straightened her shirt, almost as if she was afraid her little girl would disappear before her eyes. Adri. Astrid swallowed, gently pulling over to a chair. Apprehension pressed upon her the longer her mother waited and father remained silent, still unmoving on the couch. Her mother never faltered. Her father never had nothing to say. Finally, she couldn't take it any longer. Straightening her back, Adriana said, "Just tell me. Please. What happened?" Astrid's jaw tightened. Finn. Finn's not coming home. Adriana stiffened. What do you mean? Her mother bit her lip and pointed to the table in front of Hiccup. A note lay face up on the tabletop. Adriana gingerly lifted the paper and read it over once, twice, 3 times before she finally let it rest in her lap. How could he do this? She hissed. He's always making everything worse. Adri. Astrid grasped her hand. If he never comes home, you do know what that means, right? Adriana sighed through her nose. I'll have to be chief. Hiccup suddenly took a shuddering breath. I'm sorry, Addie. I'm so sorry. He sounded so heartbroken, it made her chest hurt. Oh Daddy. Adriana sat beside him on the couch and hugged him tight. It's not your fault. Not any of it. I'll do what I have to do, but it's not your fault. You shouldn't have to. Hiccup shook his head as Astrid sat on his other side and hugged his middle. Adriana pressed her face into his shoulder. It'll be okay. She felt the lie roll off her tongue and wished she could take it back. She hoped it would be okay, she prayed it would be. But she couldn't guarantee anything. Because of her idiot brother, their lives might never be the same. He'd changed their parents' lives just as much she had. Now it seemed he'd made it his own personal mission to make their lives as hellish as possible. Eres. She would have to train to be a chiefess from now on. Her heart dropped its way down to her boots, clanging against one bone at a time. Any hopes and dreams she had might have to be put on hold now. Being a wife and mother wasn't out of the question, of course. Kara of Braun was a successful chiefess as well as a wife and mother. It could be done. But becoming chief certainly hadn't been part of her agenda. That had always been Finn's drive, his passion. His destiny. She couldn't see herself as a chief. She couldn't see herself running the village like her father did, holding village meetings and traveling across the archipelago, training dragons and catching renegade teenage gangs. She wasn't meant to be all that. She wasn't sure what she was meant to be, but she felt in her heart that it wasn't that. But if her idiot brother never came home, she'd do it. She would make her parents proud. She would do right by them. She'd had her own skirmishes with them in the past, but it was time to put all that aside. They needed her to be strong. She'd find a way to fill the gaping hole that was left in her brother's stead, even if she had to sacrifice her own desires to do so. Suddenly, she stood up. I'm going to Eric's, she said simply before turning and walking out of the door again. She tromped down to the healers as fast as she could. She didn't want to think about her new status. She didn't want to think about anything at all. She just wanted to see her best friend, to make sure he was okay. She pushed past Mara when she finally got there and plopped herself next to her best friend's bed. She'd be there all night if she had to. Hours ticked by. Adriana's eyelids felt heavy, but she continued to stare at her friend's face, mentally begging him to wake up. Other than her parents, he knew her better than anyone she knew, even more than Brandine. She missed him with an ache that seemed to tear a hole in her heart. She felt like crying as his body remained still. She thought she had only put her head down for a moment. She could hear Mara walking around, tending to the other patient across the room, but the next second, it was completely silent. The lights were extinguished except for a small lamp on the shelf next to Eric. She could feel drool on her arms from her slack mouth, which meant she'd probably been asleep for hours. Deeply asleep. But something had awakened her. She stirred, blinking her eyes so that the room would be in focus. Then she heard a croaky, weak moan emanating from someone nearby. She wiped her eyes and tried to focus on Eric. A part of her thought she must be imagining this. He couldn't be awake, not so soon after what had happened. And certainly not after she had been pleading with him to wake. Eric, she whispered tentatively. Can you hear me? The boy's head turned the tiniest bit toward her voice. Annie, he croaked. It's me. Adriana stood up and leaned over him so that her face would be in focus. Eric's eyes fluttered. Hurts, he groaned. My foot. Adriana suddenly felt the urge to cry, but she pushed it down. "You'll be okay," she promised, her heart pounding in her ears. What happened?" Eric mumbled, wincing with each word. "There was an accident," Adriana explained as gently as she could. She could feel her voice shaking with the effort not to break down right there. You got really hurt." She couldn't bring herself to tell him the horrible truth. That his foot was long gone. That he may never walk again. "You're getting better now." "Hurts?" Eric whimpered, his hands trembling at his sides. Adriana took one in her own. Really hurts?" "I know it does." Adriana's voice was choked as a tear finally slipped down her face. He looked like he was in extreme agony. "You'll be okay, I promise." Eric's hand tightened around hers. Scared, he whispered. "I know." "Me too." Adriana reached up and brushed his bangs out of his eyes. "I'm not going anywhere." She leaned down and kissed his forehead. Eric leaned into her touch, almost like he was savoring it. She thought she saw his mouth quirk into a tiny smile. But that may have been a trick of the light. "Go back to sleep," Adriana told him. "You need it." "I'll be right here if you need me, okay?" Eric squeezed her hand again in response as he finally closed his eyes. In seconds, his breathing deepened, but his hand continued to grip hers, like he needed that assurance even as he slept. Adriana continued to stroke his hair, tears dripping down her front until she too succumbed to her exhaustion and fell asleep beside his bed. Chapter 23, Back to the Source. Chapter text. Finn had been the tiniest bit terrified to return to Mayro. He wasn't sure if he'd be subject to flashbacks like his sister at the sights and sounds of the most dreadful place he'd ever been. He felt his stomach churning when it came into sight, so much that he had to lie down just after he touched down to alleviate the nausea. Once he felt better, he spent a few minutes setting up camp before collapsing into the tent and falling asleep instantly. The next morning, he awoke to the sun shining through the opening at the front of his makeshift tent. For the first time in a very long while, he didn't feel like getting up. He was usually a morning person, and the very idea of sleeping until the sun was high enough to beam down at him so brightly had once been abhorrent. Now he felt like rolling over and going back to sleep. Unfortunately, he also needed to go to the outhouse, so he figured that was as good a reason as any to get up. When he had gone through his morning routine, minus breakfast lest the nausea return, he set out for the source of his problems. Finn knew this path. It was a bit surprising, even to him, that his memory was as sharp as it was, considering the last time he had been there was 8 years ago. His body felt stiff, his stomach churning with a mixture of anger and fear. He was literally walking directly into his nightmares, but this time, he wouldn't back down. The stones on the path were sharp, he could feel them through his boot. He remembered his feet bleeding after the long trek to the house. The second night, Binnen had brought him some water so that he could wash them. The man hadn't spoken, but it was a gesture of kindness he hadn't forgotten. Now that he thought about it, it had probably been extremely risky to attempt to sneak water from the well without Rattray noticing. Even after Binnen had died, Finn still found new reasons to love and respect him. As the house finally came into view, the Haddock boy felt another wave of nausea. Weeds covered the walls and the garden was in shambles, but beyond that, there was no difference between the house as it was now and the house he had left. Finn looked for signs of more slaves, but apparently Rattray had given up on the idea. Or perhaps he could no longer afford them. Finn's strides became more difficult the closer the house became. It was so much smaller than he remembered. Perhaps this was because he was so much smaller at age 7. Or because his dreams made it seem like an impenetrable, cavernous prison. Either way, it hardly looked like the setting of hundreds of nightmares. In fact, it hardly looked like anyone lived there. His eyes traveled to the tiny building out back where he and Binnen had slept. Almost of their own accord, he walked up to it and lifted a trembling hand to push it open. 2 mats still remained. Finn remembered curling up on his and forcing back tears until he fell asleep. He had to bend down now to even enter the room because the roof was several inches too low. There were dusty boxes piled on top of the mats, like Rattray had started using this as a storage room. Clearly no one had lived here for quite some time. Finn sincerely hoped it had been deserted for the full 8 years, but, Knowing Rattray, he couldn't be sure. He crouched down next to Benen's mat. A tiny indentation still remained in the middle, where his best friend had slept. Finn got on his knees and traced the faint outline with his finger. His heart ached with grief at the realization that Benen had slept there for years. This flat, uncomfortable mat that had made Finn's back sore had been the most comfortable object in his friend's possession. Something on the wall caught his eye as he looked up at the boxes. Just next to the mat where Benen had slept, words were carved into the wooden wall. Finn had to crouch down low to see them through the strips of sunlight shining through the wooden beams. He squinted at the faded letters, worn by years of rain and snow seeping through the small building. One name finally jumped out to him. Nora. Finn felt a wave of sadness for his friend. Nora was Benen's older sister's name. The two had been very close, but he had never seen her again after the raid on his village. And yet, over 40 years later, he had carved her name in the dank, dingy place he slept as a comfort to him in his life of misery. Finn made out the names of Benen's parents, Claire and Eden. A few names Benen had mentioned when talking about old friends he'd had. Aida's name was the most worn of them all, presumably the first he had carved. There was a name Finn didn't recognize at all, Camille. But it was the name squeezed into the space closest to the corner that stunned Finn the most. He felt his throat constrict, his eyes burn with tears as he stared at the 4 letters over and over again. Finn. Benen had written the name of the little boy he had only known for a day among the names of people he had loved all his life. This tiny gesture was enough to make Finn want to break down crying again. How had he known? How could he know that he would come to love Finn the way he loved his own family? That he would die for this boy? Finn reached out and touched the worn letters on the wall, his fingers shaking with pent-up emotion. Hiccup and Astrid had offered to take Benen to find his family. They had been willing to let him leave Berk forever to live his own life with his own people. And Benen had turned it down. He had turned down seeing Nora's possible children or grandchildren, had turned down finding Aida again, seeing his own home again. He had chosen to live the rest of his life on a strange island simply because of a little boy he had met 3 days previously. The weight of Benen's sacrifice crashed down on Finn so that he felt tears dripping down his face. His best friend had truly been the strongest, bravest, most humble and compassionate person he had ever known. It was something Finn knew he would never have been able to repay, and yet Benen had never drawn attention to it, never once used his selfless actions as leverage when the two had had a rare disagreement. And Finn had done nothing short of ruining his memory. Instead of taking this path of selflessness and compassion, he had turned into the sort of monster who had abused Benen every day for decades. For the first time, he was glad Benen had died before he had to see what an abusive tyrant Finn had become. He didn't think he could handle those sad, disappointed blue eyes boring into him. Benen would be so ashamed of him. "I'm sorry," Finn whispered to the wall of names. "I wasn't worth staying for. I wasn't worth saving. I should have died when that barn collapsed, not you." He put his forehead against the wall as a wave of tears dripped down his face. Whack! A sharp pain exploded across Finn's upper back and neck. The haddock boy jumped to his feet and came face to face with a frail, elderly man whose cold grey eyes he could never forget. The man bellowed something in Latin, but the words were garbled in the boy's ears. For a moment, he stood still, his heart pounding loudly and his body frozen in terror. Then the spell broke. With one swift movement, Finn threw out his hand and grasped the man's throat before slamming him into the wall of the building. "You," he growled through gritted teeth. "Let me go." Rattray whimpered in a weak, strangled voice. "Spare me." "Spare you?" Finn let out a mad, derisive laugh. "Look at my face. Please. Look at it," Finn shouted. "And don't tell me you don't know who I am." The grey eyes that had flashed through his dreams locked onto his. In a moment, they widened in recognition. "I'm not a helpless little boy anymore," Finn hissed, his nose centimeters from Rattray's. "I give you anything. Have mercy." Rattray begged in a trembling voice. "Mercy?" Finn bellowed, his grip on the man's throat tightening. "You think you deserve mercy for what you did to me? Did you give me mercy when I begged you not to beat me? Did you give me mercy when you watched blood pouring down my shoulders? When you kept me in chains, The man whimpered again, his veins pulsing beneath Finn's fingers. Finn leaned forward until their noses touched. Give me a reason. One reason to spare you. Tears poured out of Rattri's eyes as he struggled hopelessly against Finn's hold. He knew he had no answer. He knew Finn had the upper hand. He knew he was going to die, and Finn enjoyed watching him squirm. The desire to tighten his hand and watch the life drain out of Rattri's eyes enveloped the haddock boy. It would be too easy. A fitting end to the monster who had beaten him, spat on him, treated him as less than the dirt beneath his feet. The man who had treated Binnen like property for years. Anger fueled him and his fist tightened. Rattri's eyes bulged. And then, very suddenly, a voice entered his head. If you remember nothing else, remember this: in life, you have many paths to choose from. Some are good, some not so good. And sometimes you don't know which path is the right path. But it's never too late to change it. Finn dry swallowed, his eyes still locked onto the man he hated more than anything. Ending his life would be so easy. But Binnen's voice echoed through his mind. The stubborn boy within him desperately wanted to end it. But if Binnen were watching him right now, what would he want him to do? Now was the time to choose his path. Now was the time to decide who he truly wanted to be. Did he want to be the raging man who lashed out every time he was wronged, or the wise man who valued mercy and forgiveness? He could choose the path Rattri had chosen, the path of abuse and hatred for his fellow man, or he could choose the path Binnen had chosen. He felt the full weight of his choice. The time was now. His heart pounding and his eyes burning, Finn slowly lowered Rattri to the ground and opened his hand. Rattri gasped. "Why? That wasn't me." Finn hissed to the older man, malice in every syllable. "That was Binnen, the man you tortured and insulted. But I won't be like you." He shoved the man against the wall and stomped away, wiping his tears with the back of his hand. And though he didn't know it then, that would be the last time he ever saw the house, either in real life or in his dreams. Cliff Smedley hadn't slept in days. Every time he closed his eyes, the scene replayed. His best friend Eric lying in a pool of blood, bone shards everywhere, his screams echoing off the walls, there was no escaping it. In Cliff's entire life, he'd never seen anything so horrific. And underneath it all was the constant, pervasive fear that that would be the last time he ever saw Eric alive. But the Smedley boys' behavior didn't go unnoticed, at least not by Vernon and Thalia Smedley. Very little slipped past them, especially concerning their only child. Cliff had always been quite a character, even in his Shire youth, but they had never known him to be this morose. He had insisted on going to work, but Horst told them he barely got anything done. To Thalia, this level of depression was simply unacceptable for her son. She had spent the better of 10 years trying to encourage him to be outgoing and cheerful so that he would have friends. Cliff had taken these lessons to heart in the last year and was finally getting out of the house and chattering away about his new best friend Eric. Vernon, a man of few words, listened with a smile as Thalia peppered their boy with questions about work and Eric and dragon training. They honestly hadn't expected Cliff to turn into a recluse, not after all the progress he had been making. They never thought they'd see the day when he spent every night petrified of falling asleep and every day crying at random and locking himself in his bedroom. So when Vernon finally heard that Eric had awakened during the night, he had gone immediately to fetch his wife so they could talk to their son together. Cliff was at the leather shop, shakily trying to repair a saddle. There were dark circles under his eyes and he had to blink constantly to keep himself focused. "Hey," Thalia said in a gentle tone, sitting down next to Cliff and putting her hands on his shoulders, "how are you feeling?" Cliff shook his head. He looked to be on the verge of tears again. "Eric woke up last night," Thalia continued. "I'm sure you heard about it." Cliff nodded. "Why don't you go talk to him?" Thalia asked, squeezing her son's shoulders. "I'm sure he'd love to see you." "I can't," Cliff mumbled. "Why not?" "Just can't. I think it'll be good for you." Vernon spoke up at last. "See him awake. And you'll make him smile." Thalia added. "He needs to smile right now." Cliff put his head in his hands and his shoulders shook. Thalia rubbed his back. "I thought he was going to die," he whimpered. "I know you did." He might still die. No, he won't. Vernon said firmly. Hiccup didn't. Gobber didn't. Eric's going to be fine. Cliff lifted his head and wiped tears off his face. Vernon's expression softened. If he's your best friend, you should go see him when he needs you, he stated. Your dad's right. Thalia ruffled her son's curly hair. Go now. You're no help here. But Horst can handle it. You're not exactly rolling in orders, especially after what happened. Thalia patted his back. Come on, up you go. But Mom. Don't argue with me. Thalia waited until her son was standing before she crossed the room to open the door. Go be a bra. Cliff gave her a half-hearted, though somewhat amused, smile as he crossed the room. He leaned down to kiss her on the cheek. Thanks. Love you, Cliffy. Thalia beamed at him. Love you too, Mom. And you, Dad. Vernon nodded at him, which Cliff knew to mean I love you too. Adriana woke up with a sore back. She wasn't used to sleeping while sitting and she disliked it immensely. She made a mental note to sleep in her bed that night. Eric was still unconscious, but he occasionally grunted in his sleep. That had to be a good sign, didn't it? Morning, sleepyhead. Inga said cheerfully, pulling back the curtain. Can't say this is the most relaxing place to spend the night. Unless you're the patient. Can't say you're wrong. Adriana replied through a yawn. Worth it though. I got to talk to him. Yeah, Mara was up to go to the outhouse and she overheard you two. By the time she came back to chat, you were both out again. Word got all over Burke this morning. Inga stared at Eric's sleeping form. He looks better. But I'm no expert. Aren't you training to be a healer? The important word in that question is training. Inga reminded her. So did you want to stay for breakfast or are you going to the Great Hall? I'll stay. Adriana told her. I want to be here if he wakes up again. Ah. I leave you lovebirds be then. Inga smiled knowingly, her eyes resting on their clasped hands. It's not like that. Adriana mumbled. It's always been like that, you two are just too stubborn to see it. Inga raised an eyebrow. Been obvious to everyone else for years. Like you and Finn. How dare you imply something so preposterous? Inga scoffed. We're not even friends. The sparks you two throw are strong enough to power Burke for a month. Adriana smirked at Inga's outraged expression. Deny it all you want. But you're so going to be my sister. Inga paused, looking like she'd just remembered something unpleasant. I thought Finn wasn't coming back. Adriana shrugged, now that she had slept. She had decided to shove away such negative thinking. Nothing can stop true love. I will smack you. Okay. Adriana put her free hand up in mock surrender. I know better than to get on your bad side. As well you should. Inga narrowed her eyes at the haddock girl. I'll toss a muffin your way when I get the chance. You didn't bake said muffin, did you? Why would that matter? Because I hate it when people throw rocks at me. Ah, you're just as bad as your evil twin. Inga stomped off. Love you, sis. Adriana called after her. Yeah. Inga waved an arm dismissively. Adriana snickered and turned back to Eric, who had begun to stir. You two are loud, he mumbled, his mouth stretching into a tiny smile. Sibling rivalry. Adriana replied. How are you feeling? Eric opened his eyes and stared blearily at the ceiling. Awful, he croaked. You probably will for a while. Adriana adjusted the bed so Eric could sit up a little bit. Want something to drink? Water? No, Gobber's finest mead. Adriana deadpanned. Eric's mouth turned up in a smile. Yes, water. Thanks. Eric said hoarsely. Adriana fetched him the nearest skin of water and held it up to his mouth. He had to drink slowly, but he looked a bit better when he was finished. Not sure how I feel about sarcasm this early in the morning. Eric mumbled. It's almost 11. Early for you, he winked at her. So how? He squeezed his eyes shut and put a hand to his temple. Adriana leaned in to get a closer look at his face. Are you okay? Headache. Eric replied. Going away. How'd I get here? You don't remember. Adriana's face fell. The last thing she wanted to do was to tell Eric that he would need to walk with a prosthetic for the rest of his life. I'm not sure I'm the right person to tell you this. Hey, Eric took her hand and squeezed it. Adriana's heart lifted with hope because his grip was quite strong for someone who had nearly died less than a week ago. You're my best friend. I trust you. Adriana smiled at these words. Even if he didn't remember their exchange just before he passed out, her presence here seemed to have clued him in. She steeled herself. First off, what do you remember? I was goofing off with Cliff. Goes fuzzy after that. Why, did I hit my head? Eric put his free hand to his temple. No, your head is fine. Adriana replied softly. She gazed down at his leg for a split second. We think it was an accident, the only witness isn't here to ask what really happened. But you and Finn were on the mill. Somehow, you fell in. Eric's breath hitched. He stared at her with slightly parted lips. What? Eric. Your leg. Adriana gently touched the blankets beside his knee. She watched a bead of sweat trickle down his left temple. What? What's wrong with it? It's healing just fine. Adriana said softly. But. She didn't know how to say it, so she merely lifted the blankets to reveal his stump. Eric sucked in a breath and froze, staring at his leg in a mixture of horror and shock. Adriana tried to gauge his response, unsure where to continue. Mara said it's healing really well. And my dad was unconscious for his accident much longer. Eric suddenly grasped her hand tightly. His face was tight in agony. I don't remember. He whispered hoarsely, tears gathering in his eyes. Annie, I don't remember anything. It's okay. It's okay. Adriana quickly sat forward and hugged him tight. We'll figure it out, I promise, and we'll get you a prosthetic just like my dad's and we'll get you back on your feet again in no time. I promise. She didn't know how to make it better or what words to say. But she suspected only time and friendship would help him cope with the shocking news. A soft knock on the curtain made Eric pull away, wiping the tears out of his eyes with a hand. Adriana turned to the door questioningly. I don't know if you want to see anyone. It's okay. Eric swallowed. I'm okay. Adriana nodded. He wanted, no needed, something to ground him again. Having extra people might help calm him down. She turned toward the opening. Come in. Cliff tentatively poked his head in. Hey. Oh, it's you. Eric deadpanned with a smirk. Should have known you'd do something like knock on a curtain. Oh, do you want me to go? Cliff's face fell. What? No, I was kidding. Eric looked slightly apologetic as he held out his free hand. See me, bruh. Cliff slowly sauntered in, glancing once at Eric's leg. Adriana quickly covered it again for both their sakes. Sorry, I'm just now coming. I just woke up. So unless you wanted to hear me snore at you, you're just in time. Eric quipped with a smile. It wasn't that obnoxious. Adriana shrugged. I tuned it out after a while. Hey. Eric narrowed his eyes at her as Cliff tittered nervously. Not helping. Looks like you've had her all to yourself. Cliff playfully punched Adriana's shoulder. Quite the ladies' man, aren't you? Oh, be quiet. Adriana smacked his arm. Behave, you two. Eric made a mock serious face at them both. Or I'll have to kick you out for disturbing the peace. Cliff gave half a smile. Your face is disturbing the peace. Eric narrowed his eyes but shook his head in slight confusion. This wasn't the Cliff he was used to seeing. Sure, some of the playful attitude was there, but it was guarded. Withheld. In the other boy's eyes, he saw worry and fear underneath the goofy guys. So I'm going to get you guys some food. Adriana said after an awkward silence. She squeezed Eric's hand. I'll be back. Take your time. Eric smiled at her as she walked out. Then he turned to Cliff. What's up, man? Cliff sat in the chair Adriana had vacated. Eric knew Cliff to fidget a lot anyway. But as the seconds ticked by, the boy wrung his fingers together tightly and squirmed in his seat. Eric had never seen him look so morose. Cliff. Finally, the curly-haired boy looked up. I thought you were going to die, Eric. Eric swallowed. What happened? Cliff's eyes widened. Horst and I heard you screaming. We ran up and you were just. He paused, taking a shaky breath. There was blood everywhere. Finn was there, I don't know why. Then Horst told me to go get help and I found Hiccup. Cliff ran a hand along his face. It keeps replaying in my head every day. Eric took in his friend's condition. Dark circles under his eyes, pale skin. He didn't look good. I'm sorry, Cliff. You shouldn't have had to see that. Cliff shook his head bitterly. Not your fault. What's that mean? Does Finn know what happened? Cliff glared at the floor. Finn's gone. Took off that night. Eric blinked in shock. Gone. Took off, what? He did something. Cliff said in a wrathful voice, which was even weirder than him being silent. Nobody knows what happened up there and Finn left before anyone could question him. And now that he's vowing to never come back. Never come back? Eric asked in shock. Why wouldn't he come back? Cliff shrugged indifferently. Guilt. Good riddance, I say. You make it sound like it's his fault. Cliff glared at a spot slightly to his left. We left you up there alone. It wasn't 5 minutes and you were screaming. He was supposed to be in jail. You do the math. Eric blinked suddenly, a sliver of a memory surfacing. Wait. Finn. He dropped his head into his hands. Finn was there. Cliff's voice was softer. You remember. Adriana's voice wafted over his shoulder. You remember something. Both boys looked up at her in surprise. She smiled wanly and said in a sing-song voice, I'm back. It was an accident. Eric muttered. He didn't mean to do it, I tripped. You don't have to protect him. He's not here. He's not coming back. Adriana growled, handing both boys a muffin. No, I mean it. It was an accident. It was stupid but I remember Finn's face when he pulled me out. He didn't mean to do it. Eric said firmly. Yeah, he was upset all right. Adriana reluctantly conceded. But he didn't even apologize. He just flew off. Annie, he is your brother. So what? Adriana huffed. If he nearly kills someone, I have to bail him out. I don't think so. I'm not saying that and you know it. Eric said in an uncharacteristically serious tone. He's not a lost cause. I don't hate him. Adriana said darkly. I just never want to see him again. I don't think you mean that. Eric took her hand. And I don't even think you're supposed to forgive him right here and now. But come on, if there's a chance for reconciliation. Just because your brother is an idiot doesn't mean. Cliff interrupted. No offense but I kind of see both your points. And I don't like watching my favorite couple argue. Adriana and Eric stared at each other for a second before Eric shrugged. Look, just give him another chance. That's all I'm asking. Because I swear, it was an accident. Adriana studied his face. Cliff stared at the floor in frustration. Well, she said finally, hand on her hip. If he ever shows his face here again, I guess we'll have to ask him. Adriana stepped over to the curtain, clearly closing the conversation for herself. Annie. She turned back to Eric with a raised eyebrow. If Finn's gone, does that make you the future chief? Adriana's brow pinched slightly. It would seem so. With that, she pushed out the curtain, her long blonde hair swishing down her back as she went. She's not too happy about that, Cliff muttered. He bailed out on a lot of stuff. But like I said, good riddance. Eric's heart clenched at those words. He wouldn't press the matter, but deep down he knew Finn hadn't wanted this. There was always hope for change. If Finn's parents had taught him anything, it was that there was always hope. Anybody could change the course of their future. One would think watching the ocean waves beating upon the seashore in a rhythmic pattern would be relaxing. But from 2,000 feet up, Finn found himself bored and depressed beyond measure. He knew he'd made the right decision in letting Ratri go. Deep down, he felt it was the right thing. But even in the aftermath, he felt withdrawn, rudderless. He wasn't sure what to do next or where to go. He still didn't have a plan. However, it was at this point that he didn't care. Usually he liked sunsets. The sky beheld a kaleidoscopic view, a cacophony of colors so vast and beautiful that usually took his breath away. He figured he was like his dad that way. Always staring at the horizon with a certain longing in his eyes, that hungering desire to see how far he could go, how fast he could fly. But now, Finn stared down at the rocky crags below, peeking out of the frothy waves. He'd always been an active person. For as long as he could remember, he'd always bounced out of bed and run out the door, ready for another day of playing or hard work. Finn always found some activity or work to be done to lift his spirits. He'd never known depression like this could exist. He felt dull, blank. Any activities that would normally cheer him up sounded bleak and dismal. He didn't have a care in the world for anyone or anything. It was at this point in his loneliness that he wanted to drown in loneliness itself. Nothing could possibly help him now. Sharpshot took the note to his parents. Despite Toothless and Stormfly's great tracking skills, he knew what to do to evade them if need be. It would take them at least a week to track him to Mayro, which was now a dozen miles west. He'd stopped Tornado on a lonely little island in the middle of the ocean. If they ever came looking, and he suspected at some point they might, they wouldn't find him here. He'd be long gone by then, one way or another. A pebble rolled off the edge and plummeted down the chasm. Finn watched until it disappeared from his vision. Tornado was somewhere in the woods, either hunting or sleeping or just keeping his distance. His mood swings had increased the last few days that Finn almost didn't think his dragon would even notice his disappearance. It would be easy to just slip off the edge and let himself free fall until splat. No more fearless Finn Haddock to be seen or heard from again. If he deserved anything, that's what it was. Finn was just warming up to the idea, really considering it, when a high-pitched wail of distress sounded from the woods. He whipped around with a gasp, blue eyes searching. It wasn't Tornado, but it was definitely a dragon. He couldn't immediately place the species, so it must be a dragon he'd never seen before. The wail sounded again from deep in the forest and Finn found himself scrambling to his feet. Even in his depressed state, that was a distinct distress call from a giant flying lizard. It was ingrained in his system, practically in his bloodstream to come to its rescue. A branch slapped him in the face as he plunged into the forest. The deeper into the wood he ran, the more the trees seemed to thicken. Weaving between the massive trunks and bushes, Finn strained his ears to find the distressed dragon. Finally, a crash sounded from nearby, followed by distinct, angry growls. Finn turned a corner and saw a large tree trunk blocking his path. He paused only for a second to find the easiest route over the obstruction. Running toward a nearby boulder, Finn kicked off and vaulted over the fallen tree and landed on the other side. He rose from his crouch and gasped when he caught sight of the most beautiful dragon he'd ever seen. Glistening blue-green scales of varying hues from tail to snout with matching sea-green eyes, writhing in a rope net tethered to the ground. She tossed and turned on her side, bashing her tail against the ground, trees, anything in her path. Finn swallowed hard, staring at her in awe before she caught sight of him. The dragon wailed in fear, struggling against the ropes, her claws creating deep grooves in the ground. "Hey, no, it's okay," Finn called, quickly grabbing any knives or weapons he had on him and throwing them as far away as he could before she really got dangerous. The weapons clattered into a heap in the bushes behind him and the dragon's thrashing lessened. She stared at him with a wary, cold eye. "It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." Finn inched forward, holding out a hand. The vibrant dragon growled lowly, issuing a warning. Finn gingerly stepped closer, stopping at 10 feet from her snout but careful to stay in her line of sight. "Look at you," Finn murmured, crouching to look her in the eye. "You're quite a beauty, aren't you?" The dragon sniffed at him and looked away, clearly annoyed. For the first time in a while, Finn cracked a smile. "Listen, I'll help you out of that if you promise not to bite my hand off." That sound fair? Inching forward, he closed the distance until he sat 3 feet in front of her. She glared at him, her gaze piercing. Finn almost wished his father was here. He'd probably know what kind of dragon this was and what all of her special abilities were, from how fast she could fly to what her favorite food was, right down to what kind of fire she breathed. All that good stuff. But his dad wasn't here, so he'd have to figure all that out later. This net was clearly set by dragon trappers. He'd heard her screams from nearly a mile away. There was no telling if the trappers were still on the island. He didn't want to get captured with them. He'd had enough of being captured in his lifetime. Carefully, he held out a hand in front of her snout. She growled indignantly, trying to back away. "Hey, it's okay, look," Finn said carefully. "Look, I just want to help. I'll get you out and I'll leave you alone. I'll walk away and never see you again. Okay?" The bluish-green dragon stared at him beadily for another minute before looking at his hand. He watched in fascination as her eyes dilated. Finally, she inched forward, sniffed his palm, and eased her snout into it. Finn held his breath. Raising up his other hand to gently scratch under her chin, he vaguely wondered if this was what his dad had felt back when he met Toothless, bonding with a dragon for the first time, the first boy to ever bond with a dragon. Her scales were warm and a little slimy, leaving a sticky residue on his hand when he withdrew. He vaguely wondered if she was an aquatic dragon, like Thornado. The dragon hummed eagerly when he scratched her chin. Finn smiled. Yeah, let's get on with it." Inching forward, he began inspecting the ropes. It took a few minutes, especially without some kind of weapon to cut the rope, which would have been the simplest route, but eventually he found a large knot behind her bony head. With deft fingers, Finn began to unravel the ropes. He was glad to have worked with weapons and rope long enough to have strong hands, or else he might not have been able to release her. He'd be crushed if he had to leave her here at the mercy of dragon trappers just because he couldn't untie a stupid knot. Finally, the ropes loosened and Finn began to undo the crisscross design. The dragon tensed beneath him, ready to be free. Finn pulled out the final knot and rested a hand on her back. "All right, big girl, you're..." The dragon leaped out of the remaining bonds and roared. Too late, when she spread her wings and stretched out, Finn saw the crackling across her scales that only meant one thing. Her sparking wing smacked him in the chest, sending him flying backwards in a smoking heap. Finn gasped, clutching his chest in agony for nearly a minute before the blinding pain began to dim. He looked up in a dazed shock, blue eyes wide. She stood nearby with her tail curved around her body, her head down in shame. She cooed at him, clearly expecting him to yell and punish her. Groaning, Finn rolled into a seating position. He pulled open his shirt to see little red blisters dotting his chest. "Ow!" Finn frowned at the dragon. "You could have warned me." The dragon mewed at him, tucking her head down between her paws. Despite the pain, Finn couldn't help but melt a little at how cute she was. If his dad was ever right about anything, it was that dragons weren't really evil creatures. She'd gotten so excited to be free that she'd gone overboard. She hadn't meant to hurt him at all. He could write a book about the shame written all over her face. Finn slowly got to his feet, walking over to her as calmly as possible. He squatted down in front of her and carefully touched her snout. "Don't zap me next time, okay?" She gave him a happy coo and nearly knocked him flat when she jumped up and licked his face. "Ick." He wiped his face on his sleeve. Looking around the clearing, he wondered where Thornado had gotten to. He hadn't seen his friend in at least an hour. "Well, nice saving you, I guess. I've got to find my friend. I'll see you around." Finn gave her a short wave before walking off, pushing through some bushes. He heard her questioning coo in the clearing, almost as if she was asking no play. Marching through the trees, Finn wondered how far he'd have to walk before he found Thornado. His dragon could be quite reclusive when he wanted to be. It was no mystery that the old dragon was upset with him. He was usually an old grouchy Gus anyway, but being forced to fly around the entire archipelago on a pointless excursion probably annoyed him to no end. If Finn had to be somebody's travel service, he'd probably be annoyed too. The pitter-patter of feet behind him pulled him out of his thoughts and Finn looked over his shoulder. The vibrant blue and green dragon halted in her tracks and ducked behind a bush half her size. Finn snorted and shook his head, and marched on. A minute later he heard a loud crash and a dragon-esque grunt that would have toothless chuckling. "What are you doing?" Finn demanded, turning on his heel. He raised an eyebrow at the dragon, shaking her head as she emerged from behind a tree. Apparently she'd run into it or something, possibly trying to dodge the unmoving bushes or surrounding tree trunks. "You're hopeless." The dragon ran around him, her tongue lolling out of her mouth. Finn rolled his eyes and carried on, trying to ignore her as he called for his dragon. At long last, the duo found the Thunderdrum gazing down at the ocean from a cliff, just as Finn had been doing a half-hour before. Thornado turned at the sound of their arrival and promptly growled possessively at the young dragon. "Hey now, it's okay Thornado. I just got her out of a trap is all. No need to be a cantankerous old man." Thornado huffed in his face. He stepped over to the new dragon and they both sniffed around. If Finn didn't know dragons so well, he'd probably think their little introductory dance a bit strange, but he'd seen it a million times over by now. Within minutes, Thornado was sitting on the ground with a grumpy expression while the smaller, much younger dragon hopped around him with excited chirps. Finn almost laughed. Okay. Man, you're a real bundle of energy, aren't you? Do you have a pack?" The dragon sat in front of him and moaned sadly. Finn frowned. Clearly she was alone and not very old. She nudged his shoulder and looked at him questioningly. "No. I'm on my own too." Finn bit his lip. "Made some stupid choices. I've got no plans but I can't go home. I don't know." The more he thought about it, the more loneliness and shame surged back into his system. He didn't know what to do. He felt so terrible about what happened to Eric, wreaking havoc on the village, nearly giving himself up to a girl he barely knew. He wanted to make good choices, he wanted to do the right thing. But how do you do that when you don't have any direction? Did he have any hope of a good future alone in the world with only grumpy Thornado at his side? He wasn't sure he could. One thing for sure, his family would never accept him back. He didn't deserve to live there anymore. A gentle wingtip lifted his chin, and he stared up at her in surprise. The blue dragon gave him a sad coo and rested her chin over his shoulder. Within seconds, Finn found himself wrapping his arms around her neck. He could feel the sliminess of her scales seep into his shirt, but he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, he accepted the hug being offered. His eyes burned and he had to blink away tears. The dragon finally stepped back and licked his forehead. Finn sniffed and gave her a sheepish smile. Then she did something he hadn't expected. Walking behind him, she grabbed the cuff of his shirt and pulled him backwards. "Ah! Hey! What are you doing?" Finn flailed as she dragged him backwards. He grabbed one of her horns to keep from falling on his rear. "Let me go, what are you?" Finn froze. The dragon released him and bumped him in the chest, nearly pushing him into Thornado. The Thunderdrum watched on, uninterested, but Finn got the clear message. Back on Berk, he'd seen it many times when young dragons would get into trouble, their mothers, even fathers at times, would grab them behind the neck and usher them back into the nest. His new friend seemed to be telling him the same thing as he stared into her eyes, unyielding but with a certain kindness and love that spoke the words that needed to be said. "Go home." "But..." Finn began. "But I can't. I've screwed up so much, they couldn't possibly allow me to come back." Thornado grumbled and the blue dragon gave him a look that said she wasn't buying the excuse. Finn stared at both dragons in confusion. He didn't know if his family, or the village, would allow him to come home for good, but he could stop by to apologize. He could stay long enough to repent of his mistakes, give his family a proper farewell, if they allowed it, and then be on his merry way. Maybe he could spend his days traveling the various islands in the archipelago, saving dragons as he went. Maybe one day he could settle down somewhere. He swallowed, his heart pounding in anticipation. He thought about Binnen once again and wondered what he would want him to do. The answer was clear within seconds. Binnen would want him to admit his mistakes face to face with those he'd wronged. Binnen would want him to go home. Just like that, Finn had a plan. He felt like a single strand of humanity had rooted itself back to the ground, giving him something to stand on. He wasn't looking forward to it, oh no, he was terrified. He fully expected his father to throw him out within seconds of seeing his face. But he had to apologize. He had to try. On his way home he'd figure out a plan afterward. He'd make things work. If his payment for his crimes was a life of solitude, so be it. He certainly deserved it. You're amazing, Finn said as he hugged the beautiful dragon once again. Thank you. The dragon cooed in his ear, wrapping him up in her wings with all the love she could muster. At long last, Finn stepped back and climbed into Thornado's saddle. The sky was beginning to darken, which made him falter for only a moment. He wondered if he should set up camp and leave in the morning, but Thornado flapped his wings in anticipation. Apparently he was about as ready to go home as ever. All right. Finn turned to the female dragon a final time. Thanks. Maybe I'll see you around, okay? The dragon gave him a single nod before turning and flapping away. Within seconds she was gone, disappearing in the darkening forest. He felt sad to see her go, but hoped that maybe one day they would see each other again. Okay, Thornado, Finn sighed. Enough of this nonsense. Let's go home. Chapter 24, Guilty 1. Chapter text. In his 15 years of life, nothing could have prepared Finn for the task he had set for himself. He tried his best to allow Thornado to fly at his own pace, but hours of nervousness and terror grated on his nerves. Finn twisted in his saddle, stared at the waves, counted the clouds, spotted familiar islands and landmarks to pass the time. Thornado growled in annoyance at his fidgety rider numerous times. But he couldn't help it. Never before had he dreaded something so much. He spotted various landmarks and familiar islands as they passed by, his trepidation rising with every wing beat. His father would throw him out on sight, Adriana would probably break his nose for daring to set foot on the island. The council would grab their swords and torches and prepare to burn him at the stake. His father was a creative man at heart, so there was no telling what the punishment would be for Berk's ex-heir. He had to be ready to make a run for it, no matter how tired Thornado would be. At dusk, the thunderdrum grumbled at him as if to say, "Stop muttering under your breath, kid, you're driving me nuts." Finn sighed and leaned his head against his friend's scales. "I can't, buddy." When they passed Brawn, Finn felt his stomach twist into knots. He tried not to think about the stupid mistakes he'd made down there. He vaguely wondered, had Rain really cared about him as a person, if he'd still be there now, hanging out with her. But instead of him, he wondered if now she spent her time with another young man. He faced forward, staring at the darkening horizon, and forced all thoughts of Rain out of his mind. It was another 2 hours' flight from Brawn, but at long last a familiar island began to take shape in the darkness. 2 massive braziers flamed in the ocean as Berk loomed in the twilight. Seeing his home again, Finn quivered in his saddle. He didn't see many patrols in the streets as they flew overhead, which was good. That meant his dad had gotten full control of the gang and many of the guards could get some rest. They deserved it. Finn felt another pang of guilt. How many husbands and fathers, even some wives and mothers, had been kept away from their families night after countless night because of his stupidity. Finn directed Thornado over the village and across the massive bridge that separated most of Berk's population from his family. He never thought too much about how far away his family's home was to the village. He supposed his parents chose this area for the peace and quiet. It was kind of nice to have that tranquility away from everyone else, but in the midst of a tragedy, mainly caused by him, it had to be a pain in the rear for his parents. Thornado landed softly near the barn. Finn slid off, his knees nearly buckling, either from sitting in a saddle for hours straight or out of fear, he wasn't sure. From the dining room window he could see a single candle flickering, sending shadows dancing across the inner walls. That either meant they'd forgotten to blow the candle out before going to bed or someone was still awake. He wasn't sure which set his nerves on edge more. Keeping a wary eye on the house, Finn jimmied the barn lock open and let Thornado slip inside. The large blue dragon flopped into his pen with a contented sigh. The poor guy was clearly exhausted. Finn suddenly realized if he was about to be thrown out, either now or in the morning, if Thornado was too exhausted or unwilling to fly, maybe his father would allow him to take a tiny skiff or something. A final parting gift for his wayward son. Unlikely. This plan was going so smoothly. Lily raised her head from her own pen and sniffed at him, her tail thumping softly against the hay. "Shh," Finn whispered. "Quiet, Lily." The monstrous nightmare huffed as if to say, "Well, nice to see you too," and dropped her head back onto the hay. Finn faced the house with an audible gulp. Should he sit on the porch and wait all night until everyone woke up? Should he step inside, hope everyone was asleep and wait at the table? Should he crash in the barn loft and wake up at the crack of dawn? He found himself tiptoeing up the stairs without further thought. He just wanted to get it over with, despite how much his legs trembled and his throat began to clench with unheard cries. If nobody answered the door, he'd wait until morning. He fully expected to be pushed away. He just wanted to spit out his heartfelt apology and leave as fast as he could. His fist rose and hovered at the door. He realized he'd never knocked on his own door before. He was an outcast, a rebel, a fiend even in the home that he'd been raised in. Worst of all, he'd done this to himself. He deserved to be alone, desolate, unloved. Finally, Finn rapped his knuckles against the hardwood 3 times. The sound echoed inside, not loud but enough to be heard by anyone still awake. Finn stood there breathlessly. No sounds came from the interior. He felt his heart pounding in his chest with every second. After what seemed like forever, Finn stepped back, resolving to wait out the rest of the night on the porch, when the door swung open. Candlelight filtered onto the porch and Finn froze. He nearly gasped at the sight of his father standing in the dim doorway. Even in the muted light, details began to stand out, dark circles under his eyes, scruff covering his jaw, the right side of his body angled as if to protect his left leg from extra weight. He'd never seen his father look so terrible before. The chief's eyes widened. "Finn?" Hiccup asked, almost hopefully. Finn swallowed hard and lowered his head. "Dad, I'm..." He didn't get to finish his sentence. In a flash, Hiccup lunged forward and Finn jerked, waiting for the punch, the hit, the anger to come flooding out and dish out to him every insult and curse he deserved. But instead, 2 strong arms yanked him forward, nearly crushing him into his father's chest. Finn stumbled, but Hiccup held him firm, unwilling to let him go as if his life depended on it. "Finn!" Hiccup cried, his voice cracking in his ear. "You're back. I thought we lost you." Finn felt his eyes sting as he pulled his arms around his dad. Hiccup pulled him closer, wrapping a hand around his son's neck and nearly sobbing. The teenager had never heard his father sound so broken before. His heart clenched as he remembered that it was his doing. What had he done to this poor man? "Dad, I'm so sorry." Finn cried, tears flowing. "I'm so sorry." Hiccup sniffled. "I know, son. I know." Finn shook his head. "You should be sending me away." "No." Hiccup's head shot up. He held Finn's face in his hands. "No. That wouldn't fix anything. If you remember nothing else I say, remember this: I love you, Finn. You're my son. Don't you ever leave me again." In his father's tearful green eyes, Finn saw all the pain and anguish he'd caused. But more than that, he saw the unwritten, unadulterated love a father had for his son. Finn closed his eyes and nodded, tears streaking down his face and a sob forcing its way out of his throat. Hiccup pulled him close again and kissed his temple. "It's okay. One day at a time, we're going to fix this." Hiccup promised. "It might take time and it might be hard, but one day it's going to be worth everything. You'll see." Finn shook his head, memories surging forward of all the horrific things he'd done in the last weeks. He didn't deserve forgiveness. His father might forgive him, but what of the rest of the village? What about Eric? What about his sister? "Dad." Light footfalls from inside the house interrupted him. "Finn." He looked up from his dad's shoulder to see his mother nearly running across the living room. Finn barely had time to extract himself from Hiccup's grip before Astrid tackled him in a hug. "Don't you ever do that again, fearless Finn," she wailed when she finally let him go, smacking his chest with every word. She immediately crushed him in another hug, babbling incoherently about how worried she'd been and foolish he'd been and how grounded he was for scaring her to death. Finn almost cracked a smile, knowing which comments were serious and which weren't. He hugged her tightly, apologizing over and over again at sending the faulty message. I changed my mind, Finn sniffed, finally stepping back to wipe his face. Hiccup ushered all three of them inside and closed the door. Within seconds, Toothless had Finn's face covered in slobber from dragon kisses. "Ah! Toothless!" Finn hissed, trying to be as quiet as possible. He pushed the dragon's nose away but still gave him a hug. "I missed you too, ya big lug." Toothless promptly slapped him in the face with his prosthetic before curling up on his stone bed nearby. Astrid pulled Finn toward the couch and gestured for him to sit down. She smoothed his hair down as Hiccup sat down on his other side. "Where did you go?" Astrid asked. "Johan and Kara told us you were on Braun," Hiccup said. Finn swallowed, not meeting their eyes. I was only there for a few days." "Why did you leave?" Hiccup asked. "Johan said you were really distressed." "More like depressed," Finn thought cynically. He stared at his knees in dread, unsure how to respond. "I was stupid." "What do you mean?" Astrid asked gently. Finn's eyes burned. He could still see her smile, feel her kiss, even though those things meant nothing. It was all for naught and he'd fallen right into it. He sniffed, wishing he could disappear with the couch. How could he admit this to his parents? Finn, you can tell us anything, Hiccup said softly, resting a hand on his back. "We've all made mistakes." "Not like this," Finn cried. Astrid rubbed his arm soothingly and waited. "I met a girl." His tone was light, but Finn felt his father stiffen beside him when he replied, "Okay. She worked in the village tavern and we talked for the few days I was there." Finn said, the story suddenly coming out once he began. "Then one night, Finn looked up at his dad tearfully. His father's gaze was firm, unwavering, but still full of love. "Did you sleep with her?" Finn gulped. "Why, yes and no. We started to do all that, but she stopped me. I still stayed the night and I hated myself the next morning, but I wanted it so badly at the time." "Finn, slow down, baby," Astrid said soothingly. Finn rubbed his face with a hand. His dad's hand firmly held his shoulder. "What happened?" "I as good as did it." Finn buried his face in his hands. "I wanted to and we were close and she saw everything." "Why did she stop you? Did she want it?" Hiccup asked, his voice clearly masking worry. "Yeah, at first," Finn sniffed. "But I guess I started crying halfway through and she didn't think it was a good idea." Hiccup cleared his throat. "She was a tavern worker." "That's it. She wasn't prostitute, if that's what you mean." Finn mumbled. Astrid eyed him warily. "You didn't ask her that in so many words, did you?" Finn blushed. "Yes." Hiccup rubbed his forehead. "Buddy. I know, it was insensitive, but I got freaked out." Finn exclaimed. "She knew I was the heir to Berk, what if?" "No." Hiccup stopped him in his tracks with a gentle voice. "Let's not think about the what-ifs. What you did was wrong, yes, but calling her a prostitute was pretty harsh. Some people have looser standards, but that doesn't mean they do it for money. Accusing someone of that is very insulting. You should send her a message and apologize," Astrid amended. Finn frowned. "What difference would it make? She didn't even like me." "She must have a little bit," Hiccup said. "But regardless of her feelings at the beginning, she didn't deserve that. You need to make that right." Finn sighed and nodded. "Okay. Still, I think you did the right thing." Hiccup squeezed his shoulder. "What?" Finn gaped at him. "But I almost had sex, I was naked, I was all ready to." She said stop. Hiccup interrupted coolly. "And you stopped. I know how hard that can be, especially at your age. I'm glad that you had enough respect for her to stop when she told you to. I shouldn't have been in that position." Finn grasped his hair with his fists. "I made a huge mistake and I've never felt so dirty." There was a long pause as Finn took several deep breaths, trying to slow his heart rate. If he kept this up, he'd probably pass out. Astrid kissed his head and ran her fingers through his hair. He felt himself calming down at the touch. Do you need to go to bed? Astrid whispered in his ear. You don't have to tell us everything tonight. I need to. Finn wiped his face. I have to tell someone. I have to talk to someone. If you're okay listening. Of course we are.